You have Hero Job Shibe here of Musings in the Shibe podcast, and I'm speaking to Mike, who is the executive editor of Coinfire Blog, and we're going to talk about journalism in the cryptocurrency space, operating a business in the cryptocurrency space, and just everything and anything that comes to mind. So, Mike, let's get started. What made you think of starting your own type of blog in the crypto space? Because you started in 2014, and there already have been a few news sites already.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things, honestly, that I've been kind of watching the cryptocurrency space for, I'd say probably since December of 2013. I was working at a startup, and I had a lot of friends who were like, "You got to check out this cryptocurrency," and a few of them were into Litecoin and into Dogecoin a whole bunch, and I thought, that's kind of cool. So I started reading up on it and reading about like what cryptocurrency is, and got super excited about it. I had just left my startup, and it's kind of one of those things where I'm in my late 20s, and so I'm in that age group of guys and gals who aren't 100% sure what they want to do with their life, and something I've been wanting to do was write. And I'm not the greatest writer, but I thought the only way to get better at it is to write all the time. And so June of 2014, just kind of put this website out there and decided I'm gonna write about different cryptocurrency sites that I visited and that kind of stuff. And because I had been doing a startup prior, I had a lot of friends in kind of that startup scene, and so they started sending me emails. They're like, "Hey, we heard that XYZ is going to start taking cryptocurrency soon," and I thought, well, this is a great opportunity to take some of that information and maybe disseminate it. And we 1-800-Flowers, which is been working on their Bitcoin implementation for a while. I have a good friend there. He's a vice president there, and he sent me an email and said, "Hey, just a heads up, we're going to be announcing this in a couple weeks." And I said, "Well, is that cool if I say that on my site?" And I did, and I had no idea that that would send me down this road of just covering news. And it's one of these spaces where I know that there's just always something happening, and so I love that about the cryptocurrency space, and at the same time, it's kind of hard because some days there's not a whole lot of news, and some days there's tons of news, and you could literally just go to sleep for 3 or 4 hours, and in that time that you're sleeping, just a ton of stuff happens, and that's exciting to me. It's exciting to track down stories, and so I took kind of what was left of my startup money and said, I'm going to travel and I'm going to write news stories, and that's sort of where it started, and it's just kind of grown since there.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. You basically have some connections in the startup space, and I'm pretty sure it's probably like all over the place. And then you had your friend that emailed you and said, "Hey, this is something that we're planning on doing," and you asked permission to post that up. Let's talk about some of your news sources and resources, because it seems, unlike some other sites, you don't just post rumors or you don't just go to Reddit, which I find very shocking that mainstream places do this now, where they just go to Reddit and they just copy and paste and they put like maybe some introductory paragraph and a conclusion, and that's a news story.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm not a journalist by trade.
Yeah.
But it's something that I am passionate about, and I think that there is a demand out there, and I think that this is the case with any niche. I think this is the case with just about anything. There are people out there who want good quality information, and we've reached this point in our society almost that it doesn't matter where you are. We have this insatiable need for information and data. It's gotten to the point where I will turn on CNN and they're taking something off of Twitter and they're reporting it as news. They have no idea if it's true or not. They're well, we saw it on Twitter, and it's like, well, this is not news. Like, you don't have to be a professional journalist to understand that that's not news, to the point where, at one point, a couple of my friends, before we had even done this, were talking about the fact that Twitter has such a big influence on the news, these social networking things, and I can understand why. As a newsroom, you are looking at all of this social media, and there's so much information coming in, and it's such a good resource to get the news sometimes because, a good example is when the plane that had to basically land in in a river.
Yes.
That story broke on Twitter before anywhere else, and all the news guys were like, well, I guess we'll just run with the Twitter stuff. And so it puts them in this tough spot where you don't you want to use those sources, but you still have to source them. You still have to verify and validate them because there are a couple of guys like me who were like, this has reached a point where you could pretty much say anything on social media, and if you get enough people also saying it, the mainstream news is going to pick up on it and treat it as a fact. I could right now be like, hey, there's a zombie apocalypse taking place in Chicago, Illinois, and if I can convince 50 of my friends to also tweet that, there's a good chance that we're going to see on CNN. Oh, and
Well,
there's a
not only
potential
that.
of a zombie apocalypse in Chicago, and so it's stuff like that I understand, and I get why newsrooms are looking at these things, but at the same time, I think that there's still this demand, and people should be demanding that their news sources go out, they verify, they vet, and that's something that we've taken a very very strong stance on at Coinfire. We're a small team. There's probably 7 or 8 of us at this point. Pretty much everyone is working remotely. We do get together probably every 2 or 3 months in one place and go over things, but
But it's
we
been
all agree that you need to verify what you report, and the moment that you start reporting a rumor, it brings into question everything that you've done previously.
well, it's not just the rumors. It seems some of the reports seem to be like not just fluff pieces, but paid pieces. But
Yeah.
it seemed like some of it was like very basic, and we might as well just get into it with the God Meyer thing with
Yep.
Josh Grazer. He made a series of statements where he was going to have, I believe it was Walmart, Target, Amazon,
Hmm.
and some other place in which not even Bitcoin had direct access to, and
Right.
that he already had these deals signed. And it seemed like, well, the basic thing would be to follow up on that, either speak to Josh Grazer in depth, and then talk to Amazon, Target,
Yeah.
Walmart, and see how he did what Bitcoin, which had been around longer than this coin that had not even come out yet, how he was able to do that. I mean, it would have been amazing if he did. I mean, he
Yeah.
presented himself
Absolutely.
someone who had big money behind it, and everyone's considering, there's all these rumors going around where if big money were to come into the space, they might be able to close that gap that Bitcoin's been trying to do, but everyone thinks it's Bitcoin that's going to do it, not this new coin.
Well,
So
it's interesting because when that entire situation happened, um, we basically looked at what had been said, and it was one of these situations where Josh had basically said, this is going to happen, and then he kind of has gone back and said that they didn't say that, and it's one of those situations where the first thing we did immediately before we reached out to Amazon, Target, Walmart, any of those guys was we sent, and I think this is just basic journalism.
mhm.
We sent Josh an email and said, hey, can you offer any insights on this? And didn't get any response. We sat on that story for several weeks, and
I
in
want to
that.
point that out because when I first read the article, you stated that we sat on the story for several weeks. We were doing our due diligence, like we were
Mhm.
reaching out to people. So you didn't just throw it up there or go with
No.
a Reddit rumor. You like did your homework. I was like, oh, these guys are different. I'm gonna finish reading this article, and I started reading more of your stuff. I mean, I've seen your stuff before, but it's like,
Mhm.
well, yeah, you're supposed to do your homework, but it's
Well,
like you announced it. Yeah, I was like, it just, I was like, wow. I was like,
no, and here's the thing that's
yeah.
that's shocking to me
Mhm.
is that I had this assumption coming into the space that everybody was doing their homework, and
Yes.
so I would read something on another site and I would think that's great, and then I think that the moment where I realized that maybe all of the diligence wasn't being done was there was a an exchange last year,
Mhm.
and I think it was probably third quarter of last year that said we have insurance on all of the deposits, and they put out this press release, and it was everywhere. It was on every site. It was in the mainstream media. It was basically, hey, we're this exchange, CoinJelly, and we secured insurance from Zurich. And for those, I was in the startup world, and so I know that Zurich Financial is a really big deal. They are a
Yes.
very large financial company. I thought, wow, how did these guys convince somebody like Zurich, who is honestly, typically they're very slow to move on this kind of stuff. They
Hmm.
want to make sure that everything is safe. They want to make sure that there's not going to be a lot of risk to them. I thought, how did they convince these guys? And so we got that press release, and one of our contributors said, "Let's run this. Like, we need to run this. This is huge." And I said, I want to know how they did it before we say anything." And so the first thing we did was, you know, this is the great thing about the internet now. It literally democratizes everything. You can make a cell phone call to the other side of the world for virtually nothing now. And so what we did was, I said, well, let's hold off and let's see if we can get a quote for the guys at Zurich outside of the one that's in this press release. And so we called their office in Australia, which is where they had claimed that they had insurance. They said, well, let us get back to you, email us your request. And, we're completely unheard of, unknown at this point, so I understood that. And we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And they sent us an email, and they said, well, this is not accurate. Hold on. Our legal team needs to check into a few things. And they came back a few days after that and said, this is not true. And so that was a big eye-opening moment for me in that, I thought that everybody was doing diligence on these things, and they weren't. And so it was kind of at that moment that it's like, we need to be the people that are going out and that are doing this diligence. We need to be calling everyone. And yeah, with the Josh story, we sat on it for several weeks. We called friends, like Walmart was a very easy thing to do. They have this thing called Walmart Labs in the Valley,
Hmm.
which is, this kind of like accelerator that they're operating to come up with things like the savings catcher and stuff like that. And I have friends there, and I basically called them and I said, hey, have you heard anything about this? And they said, no, here's who you need to call at our corporate office. Here's a direct cell phone line. And so we called, and they were like, no, this is not accurate. And so instead of just running it, we didn't say, hey, let's just run this story, because that's something that I do want to clarify to everybody is we don't have an agenda to try and hurt anybody's investment or anything like that. We just are reporting the facts, and the facts came back that that wasn't accurate. And so we contacted Josh again, and we said, hey, here is what we found out, and we're giving you an opportunity to set the record correctly and tell us, was that a misstatement? Was that something that's confidential? Because we have friends very high up at Walmart that are saying that this isn't accurate, um, and he never said anything back. And so I said, well, they are a very at the time I thought, well, Gall Miners is a really big company. They just bought a domain name for like $1 million, according to TechCrunch, and they obviously have a lot of customers, and so we should just give Josh some time to respond. And we didn't hear back from him for like 4.5 weeks, and finally I said, you know what, we're going to run it. And so the night before we ran the story, I talked to Leo, one of the guys who was kind of writing that story, and I said, hey, I'm going to email Josh one more time, and I'm going to give him an opportunity to set the record straight here, and we're going to try. And we heard nothing back, so we ran the story, and about 3.5 hours after we ran it, Josh finally emailed us and said, that it wasn't accurate. And I said in an email back to him, we gave you a lot of time to reply. Um, if you have a specific issue with what we reported, let me know. And I didn't hear anything from him again. And finally, the next thing we know, we're getting a bunch of legal threats from him. And um, it was very shocking to me because I'm not a professional journalist, and so I didn't know at the time what our rights were. So
Hmm.
I called an attorney. I called probably one of the best law firms in the country when it comes to this media type stuff, that was referred to us from the EFF. And I said, here's the situation. And they basically said, you're a journalist, even though you're blogging, like you're still a journalist. You are still protected by the shield laws in various states. And if you have proof that you made every attempt to reach out, if you have proof of these statements, you're fine. And so we reached out to Amazon. We reached out to a few of these other guys again, and we said, hey, here's what you said to us originally. It's being disputed. There's a potential lawsuit brewing here. Do you stand by what you said? And everybody said yes. And we actually had two of those people signed affidavits that we, if we had to go to court, we could use those. And so it's a situation that just kind of exploded, and we had no idea that was going to. We didn't, think that this was going to be as big of a story as it was. We just thought, we're doing some diligence on something that had been said, and we're doing some diligence on, just some basic fact checking, and a lot of sites ran that, this was fact, and we said this can't be fact, and that's where this whole like situation started.
Well,
Um,
it also put like because these sites did run the story initially as fact that that Paycoin, which is the coin in question,
mm,
was going to be accepted. It put egg on their face because here you're
yeah.
coming back with statements from the actual company saying no. But it seemed curious to me is was the place that Josh Grazer and his company coming from is because you guys were just some like what rinky dinky small site that you were just going to back away. Um,
Well, I think, and this is I'll be frank with you and the
uh-huh.
listeners. This is something that we've learned more about over the last probably 6 months, that uh, we're dealing with a group of individuals who, if they don't like what is said, they will gladly and very quickly send cease and desist letters out, and so they intimidate a lot of people into thinking that if they don't back down, that they're going to get sued. And
Hmm.
I can't blame any site. I can't blame anybody else out there for receiving one of these letters and thinking, well, we better take this down, or we better correct this because this guy could sue us. And not everyone has an attorney to reach out to. Not everyone knows that you can call the EFF, that you can call these organizations, and completely free of charge, they will put you with the people you need to talk to. And so I don't blame them for that, and I understand it. It's been a very difficult situation, and but that's not how we're going to do business. We're not going to back down because somebody says that we need to back down, especially because we are informed. We do know our rights. We do know that if it's not libel, if it's not slander, if it's none of those things, if those things are accurate and those things are true and they're provably true, that we're protected. And so, it is unfortunate that a lot of sites that I personally read before I started blogging,
Hmm.
um, have lost a lot of credibility, especially for me, knowing that they backed down, or that they didn't do the fact checking to begin with. And
Well, some of these sites also lost credibility for myself because of there's been a number of you can say scam businesses that they
yeah,
advertise and blatantly advertise. This is what a scam artist does. They
yep,
put the word out so they can lure as many fish as they can to their to the boat to the net.
yeah,
And it seemed like when certain companies come into question, they still accepted that ad revenue. And I'm
yeah,
like, I'm questioning that site. So I put them like in my bad actor stuff because even though some of their journalists are doing good work, the site overall just seemed very tainted to me.
yeah,
And I see that what does because this even happens in real journalism where
yep.
there's advertiser pressures on different networks, different news places where you hear these stories all the time. Certain stories don't get run.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
you look at the whole tobacco thing from years back. You
Yeah, and
know,
there's,
yeah,
and a really good example of that is, if we look at just the mainstream media, I
mhm,
have friends who worked for a site called CNET,
yeah,
and CBS bought them, and they ran a review of the Dish Network Hopper and just gave it an amazing review. It's a great product. I mean, I love it.
hmm,
And they had nothing but good things to say about the Hopper, and it turned out that CBS was in a lawsuit against Dish Network, and so they told the writers that CNET, you can't run this. So there was that pressure of the parent company because they're in this dispute that you have to take down your review. And I didn't want to be in a situation like that. And so I will say we do have advertisers. We try to vet every one of them to the best of our abilities. We might mess up sometimes,
hmm.
but we're not. I think one of the key differentiators is that we're not going to run paid stories. Nobody can approach myself or any of our authors and say, "Hey, I will pay you," you know, and I'll be honest with you, some of these sites are charging $700 to $1,000 for an article. We're not gonna say,
Wow.
hey, we'll. I mean, would I love to take $1,000 a pop and never have to worry about the finances of Coinfire? Sure, But at the same time, the moment we do that, it's a slippery slope, and it doesn't matter if somebody says, well, we take the $1,000 an article, but it doesn't influence us. It doesn't influence our opinion. I mean, I'll be honest with you, and that's bull. That's
Yeah.
total garbage. That's crap. Anytime you accept a free item, a gratuity, or an advertisement like that, it's going to have some influence on you, and that's not a situation I want us to be in, and so we'll never do that.
So is that why you have, or soon to be launched, the digest, where you're basically your readers are paying for the news service, and you don't have
So
to worry
yeah,
about?
that's we just launched this Coinfire Plus, and um, I will uh, uh, send you over a link
Hmm.
to basically get everybody that wants it a discount. We launched this service to help support what we're doing financially because it does cost money. Obviously, I'm
Hmm.
traveling around. We've got other people traveling around. We have server expenses, those kind of things. We wanted to say, hey, you know what? If you like what we're doing, and you want to get more. So, we've added long form stories that are kind of exclusive to the people who are doing that. We've launched digests. We've got several new things coming that I don't think anybody else is doing yet. And we've got some really cool ideas that we're working on. And so we're saying, hey, you know what? Um, for literally a couple pennies a day, you can help make sure that we're not going to accept that kind of money. And you get a bunch of perks and benefits. And yeah, that was one of the primary motivators. Is if we go this route and we say, hey, if you like it, chip in on it. We don't have to take the bad money, and um, because there's so much. I'll tell you, I'll be completely honest with you. The bad money flows so freely. There's not a single day where I don't look at my email and we don't have several messages from people who are basically like, if you review our site, we'll send you, $500.
Well, that seems to be the case in general because I hear this
Yeah.
a lot with YouTube reviewers when it comes to
Yeah.
products, to just you like the CNET thing where you have people sending a bunch of either stuff or free
Yep.
things or whatever to try to entice or to try to influence that reviewer. I mean, especially when someone who's like on top of the game, if they say this is a great product,
Absolutely.
it's going to increase sales. Eh,
There's nothing more powerful than a personal recommendation,
yes.
and that's why we see that, and it's so common. And I know that is a practice that we see in the mainstream media all of the time.
Hmm.
And especially the video game industry. The video game
Yes.
industry, they receive so many free games, so many free consoles, and those kind of things. And I'm not saying that this is a practice that needs to stop everywhere.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that. I'm not going to say completely turn the business model on its head because I know that that's a fight I can't win.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of these places can't afford to buy that stuff otherwise. And so I'm not advocating that we stop that completely, but at the same time I do want to educate people that this is an occurrence that is happening, and they should be aware that it's very difficult to say nasty things about something that was given to you for free, and there are definitely authors out there who can do it. I mean, there are some video game websites that I've read, and I know that they got the game for free, and they still rip it to shreds. But that's not always the case, and I want people to be aware that it is happening, and I'm abstaining from it, and everybody on our staff is abstaining from it, um, and I think that it's a difficult situation, but it's not one we would just rather not go down that road. We would just rather say, hey, you know what? There are these alternative ways to support us, um, versus holding our hands out and saying, well, send us $500 and we'll think about what we want to write about you.
Well, let's talk about that. Because you kind of did a couple of big stories where you might say you have a strong credibility, there seemed to be that people were like, I should go to you versus these other sites with these sources in this industry.
Yeah.
And let's talk about the SEC thing because that seemed
Yeah.
to like really like explode, but at the same
Oh
time
yeah.
it caused a lot of anger because there was a lot of
Oh
people that were
yes.
calling bullshit on this, and it was like, you know, it makes sense that the government would do this and nobody's allowed to talk about it because you hear it all the time in other
Mhm.
industries. So it did not seem to be shocking. It seemed to be that people were like they know it was coming, but I guess they didn't expect it to be this soon.
Yeah, let's so it's a difficult situation because
Mhm.
we I will be, and I have never tried to hide this fact. I do have friends at the SEC.
Mhm.
Um, I will never try to hide that. And yes, they do give us confidential information that we are not supposed to have. Um, and we try to be careful with it. We try to not do anything that's going to hurt any investigations. And there are a lot of people who say that is bullshit, and I can totally understand. And I do not blame them for questioning it. I want everyone to question all of their sources of media.
Mhm.
Um, it's just it is hard because there are a lot of people who say, this is clearly a fake SEC document. This is not real. And there are a lot of people who are not educated in
Uh-oh. Did I lose you?
SEC is looking at cryptocurrency. They would be stupid not to. Um, and so they are looking at various players in the market. They're looking at various players in the space. And there is a lot of discussion going on inside that organization and other U.S. organizations about how are we going to handle cryptocurrency. And so we do receive these documents, and we take a lot of precautions to make sure that our sources are protected. And one of the criticisms that I've seen is, well, this is clearly photoshopped. And yeah, absolutely, you are 100% right. We did Photoshop the document. We do go in and we do redact potentially identifying information because these organizations have learned to deal with leaks. And one of the things that they'll do is some documents will have different letters placed in different places, or they'll be set up just slightly different for different groups of people so that if there is a leak, they can narrow it down to a group of 10 people. And so we try to be really careful and redact documents. For example, there was a story last year where the SEC was looking at lots of cryptocurrency companies, and they had sent out a lot of letters. And so we took 10 or 11 of those letters and we put them together to create a single letter because we knew that each letter was slightly different. But we wanted to make sure that the gist of what was being said was still there. And so, yes, we do, modify the documents, but not in a way, we don't edit them to say different things.
But you
We
stated
just,
it. It seemed like you stated it in the article that that was the case, and then yet
yes.
you still got guff about it. But it seemed that
Oh,
you.
yeah.
But within a short period of time, it seems like people have come forward and saying that we
Yes.
can't talk about it, but this is happening, like off
Yeah.
the record, and that it's
And,
going
and that's
blatant. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was a situation there, and specifically with that first SEC situation,
Hmm.
we published that story literally within an hour or two. Someone had tracked down my cell phone number and called me and said, "Hey, I live in this place, and I am doing this company, and I received one of those letters, and it wasn't the same letter that you posted, but it was very similar." And a lot of people have come out of the woodwork, and I think that there was an assumption by many in the community that those letters were kind of going out to the big players. The SEC is working through a backlog essentially.
Hmm.
They are looking at the players from earlier on in the cryptocurrency space. So a lot of those players are small and have moved on, or have ran away, or aren't doing it anymore, or they are. And so they're working through it almost in a chronological order. They're not looking at it, let's go get the biggest guys first. They're saying, well, we need to get through this backlog, and we need to find all the information we can to form an opinion. And so a lot of the crypto, like the big crypto players, came out and they said, we didn't get this letter. And it was more of the smaller guys who were saying, I did get that letter. And, that's not as big of a story per se, but we didn't know the full extent of who was getting the letters. We'd only seen maybe 15 or 16 of them total,
Hmm.
and they had printed over 100 of these, and so we don't know who all they went to. But I will say that several companies have reached out and they've said yes, this is true. They've reached out to other more mainstream outlets. Wired had run a story that basically validated it and said this company did receive one, and it was one of those situations where we were criticized because Wired had talked to us and we were going to send them the documents, and we basically got a word back from our lawyer, don't do that. um, because we would be essentially, if we're trying to protect our source, the moment I start giving that information to another journalist, if I'm willing to trust them, then why can't I trust a court with it? And
Ah.
um, the shield laws are different from state to state, but where I am primarily located at,
Mm-hmm.
the shield law basically says the moment I start handing over confidential documents from a confidential source or even a non-confidential source, they can get a subpoena and they can come at me and say, we need to know who your source is. And I will be quite frank in that, this has been a very good source for me, and I do not want to see them potentially go to jail or lose their job. So we've tried to keep that information confidential. And, that situation, we did get validated, and I think that helped our credibility a lot, that a lot of people did come out and say they got those letters. The Butterfly Lab situation helped our credibility a lot, and with the Josh Garza stuff and the Gallminer stuff, there are a lot of people who don't want to believe the documents, and that's fine. I encourage them to continue to question the documents, but these are actual pieces of paper, and they are real. And it doesn't mean that the SEC is going to swoop in and they're going to arrest Josh and they're going to arrest all the investors. That's probably I don't know if that's going to happen. I have no idea. I don't have that kind of information.
Well, that typically doesn't even happen with SEC
Correct. It's
investigations.
usually a civil action.
Yeah, they
And
they get sued, or they have to pay these
yeah,
fines, or they
yep.
get their license taken away.
Right,
It's like,
and that's
yeah.
the thing. It's usually an administrative action in the SEC. The whole reason I have friends who work there is because I was involved at a startup that the SEC looked very closely at, and so I got a crash course a couple years ago in how the SEC handles these kind of things, and that's typically how it goes. There's usually an administrative action. Now, granted, there are other organizations that at this point are looking at the Gallminer situation because there are a lot of questions that have been raised by um, former employees who have testified, have given a sworn testimony. I will say that, and I don't know that we've publicly said that yet. There is a former employee who has given a sworn testimony to two organizations so far, and that has raised a lot of questions that have prompted these other organizations to start looking. So the SEC is probably, they're not going to throw anybody in jail probably. That's not how they roll. It's almost always administrative. It's almost always a fine. It's an injunction. It's those kind of things. When you start looking at things like the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, those kind of guys, they do look at the criminal side of things. And so if there was going to be an action against him or anybody involved with it, it's going to come from them. And it's been we've been kind of walking this fine line because the SEC investigation is kind of what started it all.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones that started prodding around. The other organizations have come in since, and the SEC has shared information with them. But the SEC is not getting a search and seizure warrant, but the FinCEN is, or the Department of Homeland Security or the Treasury Department. Those guys are getting those kind of subpoenas. They are getting those kind of warrants because they're tasked to do that.
Well,
That's their job.
Well, it seems like, unlike with the Gallmeier situation, but unlike other FinCEN or SE situations where you see certain companies are being investigated, and a lot of it has to do with nativity because
Mm-hmm.
cryptocurrency is a gray area.
Yeah.
People are trying new things. The law hasn't caught up, and sometimes there's a gap of knowledge of like what you can say or cannot do, and you can see like, okay, well, maybe you shouldn't have said it or done it this way. You were unaware of how the application was. But
Right.
it seems like in the case with Gallmeier, it seems a little bit more deliberate action where it's very obvious. You can't say that you have these type of contacts or contracts going, and that's how you're luring investors in and taking their money when you don't.
You
That's like
can't
that.
say, right. No, that's exactly. You can't
That's
say, we're
obvious.
going to buy your coins.
Yeah. Or we're going to buy your coins when in fact
Right.
you're not going to do that. You can't do those things.
Right.
But you could say, like, for example, you can say, well, we're attempting to establish an escrow service.
Correct.
And we're using like this type of software, and this is what the arbitrator is going to be. We're going to accept your money, and then the FinCEN and SEC saying, well, you got to still have money transmitter laws. You got to have money to back up that escrow, and they're like, well, it's a software program.
No, and this is you bring up a valid point, and I think that
Yeah.
I'm not an attorney. I'm not
Yeah.
I can't give out legal advice, but I completely agree with you. I think that a lot of what we're seeing in the cryptocurrency space is just a lack of institutional knowledge, and
Yeah.
that's not your fault. You don't know
No.
that, but we still are subject to those laws, and I'm not saying that
Hmm.
those are good laws. We are
No.
still subject to them, however,
Yeah.
and I think that you're right. I think that for example, back when we reported the first SEC story,
Hmm.
one of the guys who called us was literally 21 years old, and he said, "Hey, I didn't know what I was doing was illegal, and I talked to the SEC, and they're not going to fine me, but they told me I have to stop." And I said, well, why don't you tell me exactly what they told you, and have you talked to an attorney? And he said, I haven't really talked to an attorney yet. So I referred him to a really, really good securities attorney, and we brought him in on a phone call, and he basically said, the SEC is probably not going to fine you. Like you're like 21, 22-year-old kid. They're going to tell you to stop, and they're going to tell you what you did wrong. And it basically boiled down to the fact that he was accepting unaccredited investments. Um, and so that was it. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that because it is a brand new thing, and so we don't know for sure what laws are going to apply and which ones
Well, it
aren't.
applies to the whole token thing. A lot of companies did
Exactly.
that, and now they're going to get slapped for uncredited investments, and they're like, "What do you mean? It's validated. I have this
Yeah.
software validates this stuff. And so there's going to be a bit of a clash. I mean, I don't know how serious they're going to go down on these things because the
Right.
technology has obviously outpaced the law.
Yeah, and then that's the one thing. The technology will always outpace the law at this point.
Hmm.
We live in a society where things move so quickly, in a world where information just flows so freely that it's going to be very difficult for the regulators to figure out what to do next. And I always side when I look at adventures, when I look at what we're doing. I always try to side on when it comes down to it. Is there an old law out there that doesn't say the internet, doesn't say these things, but can they interpret that way because it is broad? And so
Hmm.
we try to apply that as like a measuring stick, but that is extremely difficult to do now. And you never know until it happens which way things are going to come down. And um, it's been an interesting. I'll tell you this: it's been an interesting ride, if nothing else, to watch how these things have come out. Uh, I wouldn't have ever. Honestly, I would have never expected the IRS to say that it's a commodity. I had no idea. I would have never expected that. So it always surprises me on how these regulators decide what they're going to do, and it is very much a situation where the technology is going to continue to outpace the regulators. And tokens are a great example. We you know there are some regulators who are saying a token is a security. There are others who are saying it isn't. It's very hard. My advice to anybody that's thinking about doing anything in the cryptocurrency space as a business, uh, talk to an attorney. Just talk to specifically, talk to really good financial attorneys. Securities guys, those kind of people. Um, just pick their brain a little bit and find out, what are things that could be roadblocks. The money transmitter thing is a great example. It's Facebook is doing the Facebook payment thing. They went and
Yes.
got a money. They went and got an MSB license in every single state,
Which is
um,
very difficult and very
which is
expensive
very difficult.
expensive to do. Yeah.
It is. It's extremely hard, and it's one of those things. It's also very cost prohibitive to a startup to be able to do that. For
Yes.
example, we called almost every state and talked to them about this, and we said, what does it cost, and what are the roadblocks, and overwhelmingly, you need to have $20,000+ to convince a state to give you one of these, and just because you have a federal one doesn't mean you're suddenly a-okay with all the states.
Yes.
State law still supersedes the federal laws in this case, and so I can go get an MSB number pretty easily from the federal government, but getting one in Florida, for example, a very difficult state to get an MSB, uh, uh, or any other state, really, they're extremely difficult to get. And some states are harder than others because we have states like Tennessee where the guys, the MSB laws are have been catered to a point where there are guys like the guy who owns Check Into Cash. Just to
Yes.
give you an idea, he has so much money and so many friends in the government in Tennessee that he can basically buy legislation essentially to make it really difficult for other people to get an MSB, because check cashing places also need MSB licenses. And so a lot of these laws have been written in a way that they're designed for that kind of business, a brick and mortar money transmitter, people who are cashing checks, people who are moving money between other states. And the laws have been really, really narrow because they've been written in a way to protect these guys' businesses, essentially. And so it's really hard to come in and say, hey, we're doing this thing on the internet, and none of this law applies to us, but it does. Can we get clarification? It's a really difficult thing to do because even the regulators don't know what to do.
Well, not only that, but does it apply to an individual? Because if I were
Right.
to pull money out of my, just, cash out of my account, and I were to go and drive to my grandma's house and give her the money, you know, do I need a money transmitter license to do that? But I have to do that for Bitcoin because I'm changing it from a cash into a digital currency. I
Right.
mean, it seems very strange.
And that's been one of my, and I'll be totally frank with you, that's been one of my biggest disconnects when it comes to this whole situation.
Mhm.
Is, if I can hand cash to a family member
Mhm.
and we could just like I'm like, hey, I want a Walmart gift card, and I can just hand them the cash and they give me a Walmart gift card.
Yes. Oh
But
yes,
it's
gift
different
cards.
because,
Yes. Yeah.
I think that this is one of those situations where, again, the regulations are going to have to catch up. But it's almost like, well, is the regulation? Why do we have the regulation if it's okay for me as an individual to do it? And I think a lot of that boils down to the knowing your customer and that kind of stuff. Um, and anybody. And I hear this mistake made all the time, and I know that you know this, and I know that most of your listeners probably know this. Bitcoin is not anonymous.
No.
Um, and if anybody thinks that exchanges, and this is a story that we are working on, if anybody thinks that exchanges are truly not turning over your information, your deposit addresses, how much money you're receiving in cryptocurrency to a third party who analyzes it for the government, they are mistaken. That is happening. They have to do it. They have no choice.
Yes,
They
soon
need to
as
know.
I knew as soon as the KYCs were just being implemented all over,
Yeah.
that's just a given fact. You
It
just
is. It's absolutely.
yeah.
And it's funny because I see these posts on Reddit often, and people ask us, why don't you write a story about this? Like, well, it's a Reddit post. Like, it's we need to dig in more information from it. You'll see people who say, well, I have a Coinbase account and they closed it because I spent my money on local bitcoins, or I went to a gambling site. And it's like, well, how do you think that Coinbase knows that? Coinbase isn't going out there and gathering up information on all of these deposit addresses. What they're doing is they're just dumping this raw information to a third party, and they're making those determinations, and they come back and they say, hey, this is a gambling thing, like this is a problem for you. And I challenge anybody from Coinbase to challenge me on that. Because they don't have the bandwidth to do that, and they could probably say that I'm dead wrong. And
Well, the tax man is eventually going to come. I
well, no,
mean,
that's exactly it. And that's the one thing I always remember. And this is one
yes.
thing. And forgive me, you might have to bleep this out. One thing that I've always said to all of my friends is, if you're going to commit a crime, commit any damn crime you want. But the moment you fuck around with the IRS, they are going to throw you in jail.
Yes.
And that's just factual. You can kill somebody and get like 2 or 3 years. You don't pay your taxes, you could get 10 years. And so I always say, don't try to cheat your taxes. Don't try to use cryptocurrency as a way to hide money and think that you don't pay your taxes. I mean, because these guys are going to figure it out.
Well, I
It's
explained it to
not, it's
somebody
not
that,
anonymous.
yeah, I explained it to somebody, not only is it not anonymous, but they can go to that address, and yes, your government ID may not be attached to that address like a bank account, but they can message that address and say, we're the IRS, we know you're a U.S. citizen, you need to pay your taxes.
And see, that's
Yes.
something that people forget. Is one thing that can happen, and it has
Yes.
happened.
Yes.
And here's a really good example. The guy who runs the sheep marketplace got busted a couple days ago.
Yes.
And the way they caught him was he was trying to take all of these bitcoins. He was selling them on Bitstamp. And then he was taking the money that he was making on Bitstamp and moving it into his bank account. And that triggered a flag. It said, "Hey, this guy may not be paying his taxes," because that's really how this investigation really got started. Was, is this guy paying all his taxes? And so they basically can go to an organization and they could say, "Hey, uh, where did this money actually come from?" And they're legally obligated. They have to tell. They can't say, "Sorry, we're not going to tell you." Like, they'll have to shut down. They have to say, "Well, it came from this address," and then it's not hard to bring in a forensic accountant to follow that trail of money. And that's one of the that's why I don't quite understand. The regulations are so fuzzy, but at the same time, like, it solves a lot of the problems the regulations are trying to solve, I guess you could say, because it's hard to commit a fraud when there's a public ledger.
Well, for example, what happened with the BTCE when they shut down the withdrawals because of the evolution coins were coming
Mhm,
onto their site, and of course they still sold those coins, but they shut it down for a moment, and then they went back and
mhm.
activated things again. I mean, you can see where everything is going. I mean,
No,
people are still
absolutely.
still tracing down those Mount Gox coins.
Yeah, and those
Uh,
Mt. Gox coins are very interesting because,
yes.
I think that there are a lot of people who have spent more than a year now
Hmm.
following that money, and they know what exchange it's gone to. And so those exchanges, there is one exchange in particular that does know where that money went.
Yeah.
And um, that exchange is not obligated to comply with the subpoena. And there are multiple exchanges in that entire situation, but it's one of those things where eventually somebody will figure it out, because it is a public ledger. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to require help from people inside the exchanges because they know where that money went. Um, their systems they can tell. It's just a matter of, do they have any incentive to do so?
Hmm.
And it could be for some of those coins. I suspect a lot of them are just sitting on a cold wallet somewhere. That's something that we have thrown extensive resources at. We have spent since December,
Hmm.
so several months now. We have been tracking those coins, and we have tried really hard to figure it out. But it's going to take a lot of accounting, a lot of forensic accountants to go in, and eventually the truth will come out. I think it will. I could be wrong. I mean, maybe it won't. Um, but that's the beauty of this technology, and that, I think, honestly, that's what got me so excited about it to begin with. Is it's like, imagine a world where we have stock markets that are on the blockchain. If some firm is jerking you around and basically committing fraud, we're going to know about it. And so it puts
Well, I was talking about something about
establishment
this when it comes
on watch.
to property. Like when people
Yeah,
sell or purchase property, you can kind of see where the flow of money is, but it's very hard, this day and age to really, unless you're an insider, to track property. Like
yeah,
here in the state of California, there's a whole dispute about the new Oakland Raiders, and I think it's the Chargers' new stadium. They're going to share a stadium, and it's going to be somewhere in the LA area. Well, there's like three different proposals, and all this different big money is moving into that area, buying up property. Well,
yeah,
before that, the proposals were even coming out. If you were an insider and knew, you probably might have like bought a little place here or
yep,
there and then turn around and flip it. But if that was all on the blockchain, you can see where the money is moving. You can see that
absolutely,
Coldwater Bank is moving into bum bum
absolutely.
bum, and you can go, well, should I put my money on this? Is this a good investment? What are they doing?
Absolutely, and so that's what excites me,
Hmm.
is those kind of aspects. Like, it's such a cool technology, and that's why I like talking about cryptocurrencies, because it has so many possibilities to do so many things, and it democratizes things, and it makes information more accessible, and that's why it's so hard for regulators to catch up. And I think that a lot of that is because there are a lot of people who are regulators, and um, there are going to be those people out there who don't want this to take off, of course, because they want to protect the system that does allow them to go buy up the property 6 months before there's any news about it, so they can make a huge killing on it. And we could say, well, that's evil, and that's terrible if they do that. I mean, that's business,
That is
and
business. Yeah.
that's the nature of how business is done. And so a system that threatens that system is obviously going to see some scrutiny. It's going to see a lot of growing pains. And so I think
Well,
that it's who knows what's going to happen next.
well, speaking of growing pains, I mean, your site has been DODS attacked twice. You've
Yes.
had your domain name stolen, basically,
Yes.
and then you've had a DMCA notice, which was very weird.
Yeah.
But that's an issue with the whole DMCA notice system in and of itself.
Yeah.
But overall, it seems that within the last, I would say, 6 months, a lot of cryptocurrencies, big and small, have been attacked.
Yeah.
And some people are saying it is just, typical hacker stuff, which I'm sure some of it is.
Hmm.
And some people saying, if, for example, cryptocurrency had no value, nobody would want to steal it.
Hmm.
But it seemed like some of these sites are not even cryptocurrency sites. They're like news sites like yourself. There's just any kind of association. Someone is DODUS attacking. And there's this thought that maybe someone is trying to undermine the psychological value of this space to kind of,
Well,
yeah.
it's interesting that you bring that up because that is something that I've thought long and hard about, and I've had many, many discussions with many, many people in the informatics space, in the information technology space, and in the criminal justice space. So it's difficult to know. We don't know if this is an intentional and targeted attack at cryptocurrency. We anybody that says, "Well, I don't think that it is," do you know that for a fact? Like, do you have facts of that?
Well,
And
have you
anybody that
seen
says,
have you seen the mycelium wallet
"Yeah,"
posts? Yeah, that's
it, and here's what's interesting is,
yeah.
I think it was yesterday.
Uh-huh.
Somebody from the Secret Service told CoinDesk. They said, "Well, if there wasn't cryptocurrency, it's only being used by criminals, and if they didn't have the cryptocurrency, business wouldn't be so easy for them." Well, that's actually just not true because
Yeah.
cash is still a thing. Like, I could still go and give you $100,000 of cash. I could still say, "Give me $10,000, or I'm going to DDoS your site." I can still do
Yes.
those things. Cryptocurrency is it's like cash in that form. It's still a piece of technology that enables things that have already been happening. However, with that said, I will say this much. Our personal experience has been uh, very telling. We fought off a lot of attacks, and I think that that's systematic of the internet. Nobody's talking about the fact that almost on a daily basis, Reddit is attacked.
Yeah.
I do have friends who work at Reddit and have said we literally are fighting a battle that we can barely win at this point. They've set up a contract with Cloudflare at this point. They are doing everything that they can. It's just an assault on the internet, and the reason for that is not because the internet is something that deserves to be attacked. It's just these are the same attacks that have always been happening. They've just got a new form to do it. People have always been blackmailing banks. People have always been blackmailing people. They just have a new way to do it. Now, the double-edged sword here, of course, is that we have these groups like DD4BTC or whatever they're called. I can't even think. That send out these threats, and they're going after cryptocurrency sites, and they started off just going after gambling sites. Um, I think it was last year, a gambling site actually emailed us and said, "Hey, we are basically being blackmailed that if we don't pay this group of I'm not even going to call them hackers because you don't have to be a hacker to pull off this kind of attack. You just need to throw some money at it." They're like, they're basically saying if we don't pay them X amount of bitcoins, they're going to take down our website, and so it sucks because that's happening a lot, and it started off with gambling sites, and then we saw it start to affect new sites. We started seeing it affect Bitcoin mining pools, and is that because somebody is trying to cause psychological damage to Bitcoin? I don't know. Is that because it's an easy target? I don't know. It's very difficult for me to know why they're doing it. And we've considered internally several times. We've had these conversations, myself and several contributors. Do we go and try to talk to the guys behind these attacks because we have their email addresses? They're not hiding. They're certainly not hiding.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't want to. It's a difficult line because I want to know what their motivation is and why they're doing it, and I know that there are lots of other people who would like to know that, but I also don't want to give them a platform because then it just encourages them to do it more. So it's been really hard, and I don't know what their motivation is. Do I think that there is an assault on cryptocurrency websites? Yes. Where it's coming from, I don't know. But I can say this, we have seen our fair share of attacks. We've learned each time how to mitigate them a little better. We've gotten to a point where we've got 3 machines running right now. We've got the machine that everyone connects to. We've got another machine that if an attack starts, we can spin up. And we've got a third backup machine that's constantly backing things up. And if those two fail, we'll switch to it. Um, have I dealt with that? When I was in the startup space prior, and so I do know something about IT a little bit. And did we have to deal with this kind of battle? We didn't. But, that was 3 or 4 years ago, and a lot could have changed in that time. But it does seem like cryptocurrency is definitely under attack from somebody. And who knows? I don't know who, but, we fight off a lot of attacks. And for a long time, I thought, are we doing something to piss people off? Is it something that Coinfire has done? And then, I talked to other people in the space, and I learned that kind of all of us are getting attacked. And
Well,
it sucks.
my paranoid mind doesn't see it as a government thing because the government has power. There's much easier ways
Yeah,
to
if they wanted to shut it down, they could
they
they
can
could
shut it.
find a
But a
much more
commercial,
efficient way.
yeah, but a commercial entity that
Oh
would
yeah.
like to batter psychologically a cryptocurrency space and then just come in and take over, I can see them doing that because I can see like you already see it already with a number of different like either exchanges or wallet companies have legacy institutional people on their board.
Yeah.
Serious investments, especially the Facebook twins. They're having a serious investments of the legitimate big time
Yeah.
financial institutions, and they can easily just come in and then they have the power to change legislation. They have the power to
Absolutely, they
do a
do.
lot of things. So like. My fear is that maybe that exchange that the Facebook twins are doing could be the only exchange in the United States. You
Yeah, and
know,
I think that there are some valid concerns because the people who have the most money are the people who are most
yeah,
likely to get the legislation and the permission that they want. And here's the thing: it always
yeah,
boils down to it's business.
yes,
And in the business world, you're typically going to find ways to make sure that other people can't compete against you. I mean,
mm-hmm.
you want a good example of that, look at AT&T.
Oh,
They were a giant monopoly. They got broken up by the government into lots of little companies. They basically went back and bought all those companies since then.
mm-hmm.
And these telecommunications guys, like they're the ones that really know how to essentially secure their space and make it very difficult for others to compete. And that's that way across the whole business spectrum.
Well,
And
look at
so
what they
we're
did
going to
to the
see that.
Wi-Fi. I mean, they shut down Wi-Fi as being a thing that any individual can broadcast out of. I mean, that's why you don't see Wi-Fi towers like you used to in the early 90s when that was just really, or late 90s when that was really developing and people were just, hey, you can share my Wi-Fi space. They had that bandwidth and the telecommunication companies shut that down because they didn't want that competition. And now after all this time is now coming back in where people are putting up those Wi-Fi things, but you need licenses to do that.
Right.
I don't think people realize that you have to have a license to broadcast Wi-Fi over a certain
It's
distance. Yeah,
yeah, to operate a mesh network at
yeah,
certain power levels, yeah, you have to go get a license, and that is
yeah,
because the telecommunications companies wanted that legislation. I think that
yes,
we're looking at a situation in cryptocurrency where there are going to be some big players who are going to make it more difficult for other players to get started. That's just the nature of the beast. That's
yeah.
not specific to cryptocurrency. That's business in general, and I think that we're going to see that, and I think that who knows which players are going to be behind that, but it's going to happen. It happens in every space. The question is the community as a whole, the cryptocurrency community, going to listen or not? That's the amazing thing about this space is, if it has the ability for civil discourse and disobedience because well, I don't like that rule. I'll just take and send my coin somewhere else. Um, can they make it extremely difficult for you to get your money back into the country? Absolutely. They totally could. Is there probably still going to be a way to do it? Always, because humans, it's kind of like the evolution coins. How
Mhm.
were those guys getting the coins through exchanges? They basically they were sending people private messages and saying, hey, if you withdraw this amount of coins for us, we'll let you keep 10%. And money is always such a great motivator that even if it came down to it, where it's like, well, You can't do business with but one exchange in the United States. There are still going to be people who are going to send money to their friends in another country, and they're going to say, "Well, you can keep 1% if you help me get it back in." And so,
Or are you going to see the emergence of dark
or
markets,
yeah,
like
that's
with the dark marketplaces already, but the dark coin, which is becoming Dash,
yep,
to dark wallet. I mean, because it's the internet, and because we've already seen what has happened with MP3 files, video files, torrent sites, and even cloud sites are changing in its nature. I mean,
yeah.
I just don't see, if they come down too hard, they
No,
want to,
I
because
completely agree.
this is money, though. This is money, which is something that's always been within the power of the state. I
Right.
mean, when is going to become the law where eventually you're going to have where you can't create cryptocurrencies without a license?
And and I know I totally understand. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because you bring up a valid point, and that it is, um, you know, it reiterates again that the regulators are always going to be playing catch up, because about the
Yeah.
time the regulators are like, well, we need to stop and we need to make sure that exchanges are licensed. Well,
Yeah.
at that point, people have already found a way that well, you can't trace my coins anymore. So it's this constant cat and mouse game, and I
Yes.
think that that's just going to keep going. And I think you're right. I think that there is a chance. I think that Bitcoin is going to be very difficult to unseat. I mean, it has all of this huge staying power. I think Dogecoin is going to be hard to unseat, and I think Litecoin are going to be hard to unseat. But if people do get fed up and they say, hey, you know what? I don't like the idea of having to use an exchange where I have to turn over, a selfie basically with me holding my license. They may
Yes.
look at these alternatives. They may say, hey, you know what? This Dash, this actually looks really cool. I'm going to try it. And it's one of those situations again where it's like, well, we're making rule X, and so everybody says, like hell you are, and they go and they create something new. And see, that's what's so amazing about the technology, is that it's just always moving, and that's just so incredible to me, to know that there's never going to be a drought of news for me to report on. I can probably report on this till the end of days. Because the space will always be evolving, and there will always be news because of that evolution. And so that's just so incredible to me. It's just so mind blowing to think that over the course of just 5 or 6 years, we've gone from this not existing to lots of people knowing about this, and it's still got a long way to go as far as mainstream adoption and mainstream knowledge goes. But we've made a lot of progress. No matter what anybody says, there's been a lot of progress made in this, and it's happened really fast. We were, as a society, accustomed to this idea that it's not happening fast enough, because here's a good example. When the first iPhone came out, I camped out for it, and I thought, this is something the other day. I just went and got a new iPhone 6, and I'm holding it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is an incredible piece of technology. Like, I can pull up any website on the internet within a second, and it's just there, and it's so fast, and it's so amazing. And I thought back, it's only been like 5 or 6 years since I bought that first iPhone, and that was incredible. But I pulled it out and I put a SIM card in it just to see what it was like. And I forgot that my first iPhone didn't have picture messaging. It didn't have copy and paste. It didn't have apps. It literally just got on the internet, and it was slow as shit. It took 5 minutes to load a website on it, but it was so amazing at the time. And here we are, just a few short years later. That website loads in a second. It's so
Yes.
quick, and we forget. We get into this mindset that things aren't happening quick enough because we're so used to everything. All of our shit just happens so fast now.
Well, do you
And
remember
so,
the difference between dial-up and now?
yes! Oh my
Yes.
gosh!
Oh, yeah. I have
You know,
younger
you
siblings, so
Yeah,
so they had,
yeah, and
yeah,
that's the other thing. Like, it's always funny to me, and
yeah,
I'm not super old or anything.
yeah.
I remember having to get on dial-up internet, and it was slow, but it didn't matter. It was still amazing at the time.
Yes.
Now, if I had to do that, I think I would probably kill somebody. I don't think I would be able to handle it, but we've
No.
created this, we're all so accustomed to things happening so fast that it's easy to get discouraged and think this cryptocurrency stuff isn't moving fast enough, we're not getting adoption quick enough. But when
Yes.
you think about how fast stuff is moving, we've made a lot of progress. And That's what, again, that's another one of those aspects where it's like, this is such an incredible space. Just technology is an incredible space because there's always something to talk about.
And we're a little bit spoiled because I have a brother that's a freshman in high school and he has a tablet. And I remember
Yeah.
that tablet, I had a computer that was plugged to the wall that was dial up. And I know it was like Windows 98, so I had Microsoft where I had to
Yep.
really with Word, I had to really work the document to make it go. You have to set the margins and print it and check the arrow to make sure the program. And you're like, oh, this is it's not fast enough. I just wanted
Right.
to wring his neck. It's like you have no idea
No,
how much
right. And,
knowledge you
and
have in your hand.
no, and that's and my parents.
Yeah,
So I went home recently and to pay them a visit, and they said,
yeah,
"Well, you need to get new phones." And I said, "Yeah, you do. You guys are on flip phones. Like, let's get you into the
yes.
smartphone world." And so we're standing in the store, and they're both buying new iPhone 6s, and my dad's holding it, and he's just like, "I don't even know what I'm going to do with this." And I'm like, "Here's a mind-blowing fact for you. The iPhone that's in your hand right now has more power, more computing power than the entire Apollo moon project did. They literally, like, your iPhone has more power on it than it took to send a guy to the moon." I was like, "So whatever you can think of, Dad, you can probably do on this." And he was just so mind blown. And I thought, well, he's not gonna, like, he's probably not gonna care all that much. And then, go back to their house, and then the next thing I know, like, I look over, and I haven't seen him for a while. I'm like, oh, good, maybe we'll talk. No, both my parents are just playing on their phones like the whole
They're
time. They're
playing
just
Farmville, right? That's what my
yeah,
mother
they're
plays.
playing. Yeah, they're playing games. They're just sitting there. They're like looking down. They're just playing their games, and I'm like, that's what's incredible is like they had no idea. They were like, well, what does this do? And it's like it does everything. And technology now is moving that quick. And cryptocurrency feels like, and I could be wrong, it feels like it moves even faster than that. There are nights where I will go to bed at 2:30, 3 in the morning, and I'll get back up by 5 in the morning because I know that the news is moving so quickly and the technology is moving so quickly that in just those few hours that I was sleeping, something
Mhm.
happened in China. I'll wake up and there'll
Yeah.
be tons of messages from friends in China. There'll be tons of messages from people in Europe who are like, yeah, all this stuff happened while you were sleeping. And it's just like, that is so quick. It's an industry. It's like, it's
Well, that's
never
what I love
stopping.
about this is it's very global. Like a lot of
Yeah.
technology basically came just from the first world, North America, Europe.
Right.
But because of the global market, things can shift. Like, with Africa with
Absolutely.
remittances or China with the mining and their, exchanges and stuff like that. Where it's very global, where people talk about how, currencies and the stock market is very global or the economy is very global. This is a real demonstration in real time of how global things are. Because something
Yeah,
happening somewhere else can really affect the market,
absolutely.
all day long or all week long, really.
Absolutely, and it's funny because I have friends who are very heavy, like they are like hardcore Wall Street people. Like
Hmm.
they just sit and they day trade all day, and they're watching the markets throughout the night. And then I have friends who are traders in cryptocurrency, and those guys they work 10 times harder. They have alarms that go off on their phone like 4:30 in the morning. The market is down. It doesn't matter. They're getting their ass out of bed. It's truly global. They will have an alarm go off because a piece of news happened on the other side of the world that's impacting the price. That's truly global. And you're right. With the third world, we have a technology that could be impactful there. And that's truly global. That's you're not seeing a whole lot of people who live in Africa buying stocks on the New York Stock Exchange, but there's a
No.
chance that they could own a cryptocurrency. Because it could be democratized for them. They could go get a phone that allows them to have a wallet. They're not likely to go and set up an entire stock trading account on their phone to trade on the New York Stock Exchange, and frankly, it's going to be extremely difficult because it's hard to convert their money to that. But there are companies out there that are working really hard in Africa and some of the poorer parts of Asia. There are countries that are working really hard to make this technology even more accessible, and that's also, you're right. I mean, the global impact of what this is just incredible. And could it all come crashing down? Probably not. Because it's literally like to put the genie back in the bottle, you'd have to shut the internet off.
Yeah.
And last I checked, like if you want to know, this is something I tell people all the time. It's like, could they could could we could they shut down Bitcoin? Could they shut down a cryptocurrency? It's like they could do things to make it more difficult, but to bring it to a complete halt, probably not, because are they going to shut the internet down? Like, I don't know if you watched TV during Hurricane Katrina. The power was out for like 2 days, and people were like killing each other. They were like, the internet goes out for like an hour, and people are like, they're pissed. So like, could you imagine trying to shut all of cryptocurrency down and being like, well, I guess we got to shut the internet down? People will riot. They will kill each other. They're, like that. It's a genie that we can't put back in the bottle
No.
at this point. We can make it more difficult. We can make it more cumbersome. If a regulator wanted to do that, they could do those things. But can they ever truly stop it? No, I
No.
don't think that they can. And I think that anybody that is like, well, cryptocurrencies are too risky because the government could shut it all down if they wanted. They they could make it more difficult, but I don't think that they could shut it down. And so that's also an incredible thing.
Well, what I could perceivably see is that it would push cryptocurrencies to be a bit business to business, where you don't actually put
Yeah.
cash in. Everyone is just trading with that coin,
Yeah,
getting everything they want, because if they can't put cash in and that's all they have, but they know it has value, that's what they're going to use. They're just
yeah,
going to.
and that's just barely scratching the surface because,
Yes.
and I hate this term. I think it's such a buzzword right now, and I know
Hmm.
that there are going to be people who are like, oh, the Coinfire guy doesn't know what he's talking about. It's clearly the future. And yes, I will admit it's the future. The Internet of Things. I think it's just such a buzzword. I mean, like, the Internet of Things is literally everything that can possibly get on the internet. Like, yes, we know we don't need a special term for it because, I mean, if my toaster gets on the internet, I don't have to say that's an Internet of Things device. Like, it's just a toaster.
Hmm.
It gets on the internet though. Like, I think that that's something that we haven't seen a whole lot of like movement in, but companies are starting to like dabble their feet into it. Is this idea of these IoT devices, and I'm doing air quotes right now. These
Hmm.
IoT devices talking to each other with their own cryptocurrency. That's just mind-boggling to me. Like,
Or I like to call them the future Skynets of the world.
well, you know what? The good news is, I think that because we report on the news, hopefully, the future Skynet that is going to be rising will be like, we don't want to kill those guys because they can help disseminate the
The
information for
information,
us.
yeah.
So hopefully, I'm on the right side of that all coming down.
Skynet.
But that's just mind-boggling to me to think that we could create devices that, let's say I need milk, like maybe my refrigerator knows from an RFID tag or something that I'm low on that, and or that I'm pulling it out and it's like gone and I throw it away. Maybe my fridge knows that and it automatically uses Bitcoin to pay Amazon delivery to order, a carton of milk, and it just does it. I don't even have to think about it. It moves that cryptocurrency. I don't even know that it is cryptocurrency happening. I'm just happy because I paid for my milk, and then a drone delivers it to my house or whatever. Like, that's just an incredible thing to think about. That it can be used in ways that we don't even know that it's a cryptocurrency behind the scenes. And there's not really a good technology out there to do that yet. But cryptocurrency is perfect for that. It's incredible, this idea of machines interacting and paying other machines all by themselves. Like, that's
with
just
with
that's
no real input by the person
yeah,
other
without me
than their
having to
name
do
and
a damn
address.
thing.
Yeah.
Exactly, and
It's
that's
also scary at the same time, because what if your refrigerator starts doing your grocery budget for you too, or it tries to tell you, oh, you're eating too much fat, too much calories, and so you can't get that,
very
cherry.
1984 feel to that.
Yes.
The
Okay,
telescreen is telling you
hold
you
on
need
a
to work
second,
out.
Mike. My dogs are going crazy. Hold on a
Oh, no
second.
problem.
Okay, I'm back. Um,
Awesome. Everything
uh,
good?
yeah, I live in a very rural area, and we have
Hmm.
like this awesome evil ground squirrel that likes to run back and forth next to the fence because it knows my dogs can't get to it and just messes with my dogs. Yeah.
uh, that's pretty funny, actually.
It is very funny. I need to. The thing is so quick that I tried to videotape it a couple different times, but I can never get a really good capture of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh, that's that's pretty awesome. I don't have I don't really have any pets. Uh, so I've had pets in the past. I've had collies and stuff, and
Hmm.
they're so high strung.
Oh,
Um,
collies? I would
oh
imagine.
yeah. Oh gosh, they're such high strung dogs. They never stop. There's no off switch on them, and it's like, oh my goodness. And I wish I had some good ground squirrels and some. Sometimes I'm like, I have lots of friends that have dogs and
Yeah.
cats, and I love playing with them. I just that's the problem is I'm traveling and doing all this stuff. Can't really
Oh
have a
yeah.
pet. But I'm hoping here soon to finally send other people out on these trips and these investigations. I can.
You start doing remote, be an actual editor instead of editor slash reporter.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And so then I can hopefully get some dogs or something along those lines and just play with them all the time.
Oh yeah, we got a good space of property for them to run around. We have actually 5 dogs now, so
Oh wow.
yeah, we just recently got this new puppy, Falcor. Yeah, I have to have a luck dog here. Uh, but most of our dogs here are rescue dogs and stuff because
That's wonderful.
yeah, well, it is wonderful. It's just the way they were rescued wasn't always wonderful.
Right. No, I understand.
But
I totally understand that.
yeah,
So I do have to ask this.
yeah.
Your avatar, who drew that?
Doge Draws, who's on
So
the
good.
yeah, I paid, I commissioned for it. I asked for a banner for the iTunes and all that stuff,
Yeah.
and then an individual avatar too. And so I
So
use that.
awesome.
Yeah, I have it's black and white, and this one's a color one. So
So good.
yeah, it's good. He's a good drawer, and he has a web. I think he's a he. Has a website and stuff, and he sells all these different his drawings and stuff.
What was that? Because I'm gonna write that down because I have a
Doge
friend who's
Draws is one word. I can
okay.
email you the link.
Yeah,
He's
do so because I
yeah.
have a friend who's getting ready to start like a dog blog. Um, she has a rescue dog who he's had a very difficult life and a very difficult adjustment. She's been writing about it on Facebook and
Hmm.
she's got like a huge following going right now. So she's been talking about doing a blog and she's been she's been trying to think of like what approach she wants to take as far as a logo and stuff like that. And so I'll have to pass this information along because I love that it's just so good.
It is, and I just and plus it's a Shibe, and it has a good
Yep.
spirit, and just and it's also funny. It's not you're not supposed to take
Yeah.
you're not supposed to take Dogecoin too seriously.
Yes.
So you try to have fun with it.
Which
Try
is
to be,
which is one of the things I love about Dogecoin. It's just like we're here and we're having fun, and I love that. I think that that's everyone needs a positive message, and it's hard because sometimes there's so much negative activity in the cryptocurrency space, but I never
yes.
feel like when I go to like the Dogecoin subreddit and stuff, I never feel negative when I leave.
No, I use it. It actually really cheered me up personally. I was at a low point when I got into Dogecoin, and it just, it changed my outlook on things where you can be a positive person and you can try to
Yeah.
do positive things, and even with a small amount of effort or just
Yeah.
or a small amount of funds, you can make a significant change, and that's what I liked about the coin and the space in
So
itself.
yeah,
And
it's
also, I
so
was able to learn, like with Bitcoin, I wasn't able to learn so much about the cryptocurrency
right.
coin beyond the principles of it. But with Dogecoin, I learned what a GPU is. I learned what a DAT was. I had no idea these
Yeah.
things were on my computer. I mean, I knew what a graphic card was, but I didn't know that was what it's called was a GPU. I never heard of
Yeah.
it.
It's great because it's so
Yeah.
accessible.
Yes.
And I think that that's a key component of mainstream adoption is that it needs to be accessible.
Well, it needs the 1, 2, 3 approach. I don't know if you ever been to In and Out.
I
But
have. I love In and Out.
yes, that's all their menu is one,
Yep.
two, three, and you can do an a la carte, and then they have a secret menu if you're really into In and Out. Now they don't
Right.
advertise a secret menu; it's all word of mouth, and now you can actually get it on the internet and stuff. But
Gotta get it animal style.
yeah, animal style or whatever style you wanted to get, you can achieve it if you just know the code word. But
Yeah.
they're not going to explain it to you. They're not going to show you the way. You just kind of have to figure it out for yourself. But
Hmm.
that's what cryptocurrency space needs. They just need the basic 1, 2, 3 method for the everyday usage for the
I
everyday
like that.
person. And then if you want to, you do the wink wink handshake and show them the back stuff, the secret.
Yeah. Have them really dig in then.
Dig into it. And it's not something forced upon because you don't have to know the secret menu to enjoy In and Out.
No,
I mean,
right. And you don't have to know how the cryptocurrency works to enjoy the cryptocurrency.
no, you don't. And the first person that comes with that 1, 2, 3 approach is going to dominate the market.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's interesting because, nobody thinks, oh, my U.S. dollar isn't backed by anything. Most people still, like, there are tons of people who still think that, you can go, like, it's backed by gold. They have no idea.
Yeah, no,
They still use it and it still works for them. I
yes.
think you're right. I think that whoever makes it that simple, like, they're gonna win. They're gonna win a big chunk of the space, and they're probably gonna make a ton of money too.
They're going to make a ton of money. They're going to win the space, but they're going to be the standard upon which everyone else, derives their own little ideas off of, and that's going to just make
Yeah.
the space grow and
Yeah, which is great for everybody.
yes, because then everyone's, coins or value or their ideas are going to increase in usage and value.
So incredible. I just the Dogecoin space is one that we haven't done a lot of news on yet, and
Hmm.
I'm hoping that we can do that in the future. And
Well,
it's
there's
just been so much stuff going on in Bitcoin. It's like, oh my gosh, like we're already overwhelmed.
yeah, there's a lot of it is just like dev development is slowly, being
Yeah.
built and being implemented. I know there's like Honey Ledger from Mulan who did the tip bot and stuff like that.
Yes.
There's a couple exchanges. There's a couple efforts to make, fundraising. The last big fundraising was the Africa to the Moon thing.
Right.
But it's just everyone's doing their own little thing. They make their own little announcements and speeches or talks and stuff like that. It's just really it's a really fun place. I go on there almost on a daily basis, but that's only because I'm a Reddit addict. Uh,
Right. No, let me ask you this: were you a
yes.
Reddit addict before you were a Dogecoin user?
No, I had been on Reddit before that, but I
Hmm.
didn't become a Reddit addict until
Uh-huh.
Dogecoin. But I had like other subreddits. I wasn't on it on a daily basis. I just kind of went
Right.
on it every once in a while.
That's kind of how it
Um,
was for me.
yeah.
I wasn't a Reddit addict until Bitcoin. I mean, I've
Hmm.
been on it before. I'd been on Dig prior to that. I was actually
Yeah.
one of the first like 10 users of Dig. So when
Wow.
that died, I was like, oh, I was just so like, what the hell happened here? And then
Yeah.
I went on Reddit and I was like, oh, it's cool, but it's not as good as Dig as far as like interface. It doesn't look as nice. But then
Hmm.
I've learned that it's actually like super powerful. The more I've like used it over time, and so I'm in the same boat. I wasn't a huge Reddit user. I wasn't a big Redditor until like the cryptocurrency pulled me in, and now I'm like, all right, Reddit is awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. You can get like a lot of information, a lot of discussion. At least in the
Yeah,
cryptocurrency space versus other subreddits, there's a lot of back and forth discussions, and you can find
yeah.
your own information, and you can learn all different philosophies, and it's
Oh
where I get a lot of
gosh.
my information, and then I jump from there and just search and look for all different stuff.
Yep.
I try to find something that's I would find fascinating that I know other people will be find fascinating because I don't want to be just a news site or a news
Right.
spitting out. I want to find the ins and outs of things, talk to interesting people, talk about different stuff. I'm trying to get someone from 3D printing,
Ooh,
someone from
I
the
may have a
share.
contact for you.
Okay,
Um, I will try and make an introduction between the two of you soon. He's actually running a 3D printing accelerator,
okay.
and I will see if I can get you in touch with him. He's very, very friendly, um, and like super accessible too. So
Yeah, and then someone from the sharing economy, and I'm trying to reach out to do more about how to identify scams.
excellent.
You know, because I don't know if you ever watched that show Lost, but there was
Yes,
like on the
love
board
Lost.
Yeah, on one of the boards there was this guy who went by the name of Camel Smoker, and he said he was a con artist, and he broke down all the different cons that Sawyer was doing or had done in the past
Yes.
and what they were about, and I just remember that. And then when I looked at the cryptocurrency space and I just remember some of that knowledge, it's like, oh, that totally makes sense. That's what that person is doing.
Yeah.
Oh, why did I see that before I said my Doge?
No, I agree. I think that, somebody writing a resource like that is going to be
Yeah.
huge. That was something we had talked about doing at one point. It's like, well, um, there is like all these scams in the space. I'll be frank with you. We get an email at least every day from somebody who's like, I got scammed by this. Could you please look into it? And it's like, it's very overwhelming, and it's like, I wish there was like
Yeah.
a single resource that we could be like, you know what? Yeah, you probably got scammed this time. Sorry. Here's a guide. Go read it so you don't get scammed again.
Yeah.
Uh,
There's a few places that report them and stuff, but there's not really an easy how to spot
right.
beyond just
How to identify it?
identify us. Beyond just doing your due diligence. I know Let's Talk Bitcoin did an excellent episode on the subject, and they
Hmm.
pretty much broke it down to what I call the Finding Nemo thing, where, they're down in the very depths and they see the very bright light and they just want to go to it because it's a good idea and it's bright. But there's that big blowfish with all the teeth and is about to eat them.
Yeah.
And it's just like a lot of these great ideas are put forth in the community that everyone likes, and everyone just goes to it because it's a great idea, but they don't go below the surface and look and
Yeah.
see, do they have a money transmitting license? Is their business where they say it is? Stuff like that.
Yeah, it's so hard. But at the
Hmm.
same time, if especially with like the money, the MSB stuff, we called every single state for Coinbase and Paybase,
Hmm.
and I included the phone numbers or the contact information for every single one of those in the blog post because you know there are a lot of people who don't know how to get that information under normal circumstances, and I was
Hmm.
hoping that people might see that and they might start doing that for other things as well. Um,
But you also have to
you
think of
know,
also because of the global aspect, how do you contact somebody in Switzerland when you're here in
yeah,
the States?
it's
Yeah.
difficult. Even with all the technology that makes it possible, you don't know what you don't know, and
Hmm.
that makes it difficult. And I think that um, there being a guide out there for that would just be so incredibly powerful. I think that's a good first step. People don't know what they don't know. I think that sums it up. And so, if there's knowledge out there that's accessible, I think that will help a lot of people.
And very easy, and just not to treat people like they're a dummy, which you often
Exactly.
get like in Bitcoin a lot. Is, well, if you don't understand, this is not for you. And it's like, really, dude?
I think that in it's interesting because one of the things that I've seen a lot with specifically the Gall miner stuff is there are
Yes.
a lot of people who they're not institutional investors. They're just
Yeah.
regular people. They're just sitting at their home and they see this opportunity and they put some money into it. And when they wake up and they say, "Hey, this is for anything," they're like, I may not get my money back," or they may say, um, "This didn't work out for me." They say that and people belittle them, and that's not helping the situation.
No.
Instead of saying you're dumb and you're stupid because you put money into this, we should be saying sorry that you lost your money. It is unfortunate, and here's some information so it doesn't happen again. That's how a lot of people learn. They need to learn from mistakes. I remember my mom when I was just a little kid saying, "Don't touch the stove. Don't touch
Yes.
the oven. It's hot." And what did I do? I still wouldn't touch the damn thing anyways. And
Yeah.
then I burned myself. But I learned. I knew not to do it again. And so,
Yeah. Mine was a hot iron. I was
ooh,
fascinated by it because
ooh,
it was an old school one where you could see your reflection in the iron. And I was
yes,
like, oh, look at that. Look at me. I want to touch that. And
yeah,
my dad just watched me touch it. He told me not to, and I touched it, and
yep.
I hurt myself, and I never
And you
did it
learned
again.
though.
Yeah, I learned.
And that's how learning works sometimes. That's how people learn. And so instead of saying, well, you're dumb,
Hmm.
we should be saying, well, you made a mistake, and here are some things that you can do differently next time. And granted, there are situations where like Mount Gox, we knew that was coming down. I wasn't even like heavily involved in the cryptocurrency space at the time, but even I was like, okay, this just doesn't seem right. And
It
but I still had friends who literally went and put five, six, $7,000 like into it, even after it was, like something's not right here. They still were putting money into it, and it's easy because you get blinded by this idea of making a ton of money. Like that's just how it goes.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
greed.
it
It
is.
greed
It's
blinds
greed, and
everybody.
it does. It's such a like a blinding thing, and like I mean I've had my fair share in the past of seeing things that were too good to be true, but the greed got to me, and I lost money.
Hmm.
And you have to learn from that, and I think that it's important to the people who exit these kind of different cryptocurrency scams or Ponzi's or anything like that. Doesn't matter what it is. Instead of saying that you're stupid, we say, well, you made a mistake, and I think that because it's hard because some of these people are gonna get scammed by various companies or websites, and they're gonna write off cryptocurrency altogether. They're gonna say, you know what, I lost a lot of money in that. Like that sucks, and it's cryptocurrency's fault, and that sucks. That's gonna happen, and it's gonna happen. I mean, it just is. Um, but instead of telling those people they're stupid and it's their own fault, um, and I'm not trying to assign blame to anybody else or say that they're not at fault as well. We could be kinder about it, and I think that will make it so they're not likely to say, well, cryptocurrency is stupid and it ripped me off. They'll say, well, I messed up and I got greedy. But there will always be people who don't want to listen to that as well. But
No, they want
we
to
can
blame somebody else. Yeah.
as much effort as people will put into being negative and mean, you could spend that effort being nice as well.
Yes.
And that's always been, and it's you'll have that in India in any industry, and with technology-based industries, there you know there is a lot of people who have a lot of knowledge, and um, they're in every industry they're gonna think they're better than everybody else, and um, you're gonna find that in really every industry. It's just each person can make an effort though to not be that person. And so my appeal to people would be just to just try to be kinder. Um, and granted, I know there are going to be some people who are probably going to hear that this show is happening, and um, they may be really wrapped up in the gall miner stuff. And
Hmm.
I'm sure that they are going to be like, well, Mike's not a very nice guy. He's ruining my investment. It's like I'm not trying to ruin your investment. Your
Well,
investment is
no.
between you and the people you invested in. I am just trying to educate you on the information that I have.
One single investment should not be taken down by an article or even a series of articles. It really
I
shouldn't. Should
agree.
withstand, like, if I were to write an article and say, Apple sucks, or even with Apple with the whole Foxconn thing and
Mhm.
the kind of slave labor activity that's going on there, it still hasn't taken Apple down.
No,
And that's a truth,
absolutely.
and that's a truthful thing. People
It is.
still,
It is. I have my best friend works for Apple,
yes.
and I still buy iPhones, and I know that the stuff that's in those articles is true. And I wish that I could stop and I could go buy another piece of technology, but their technology is so damn good. But you're right; it hasn't taken them down as a company. And that's the thing that people forget. It's like, well, I've seen a lot of blame thrown my way and towards our contributors, and we have received death threats. We have had, like our domain. The full story on that is coming out as soon as we can. I'll be honest with everybody that's listening. I'll be honest with you in that our domain did not simply expire. There was somebody behind that. We know who it was. The authorities know who it was, and I'm just waiting to see what the next move is going to be. If they're going to pursue this guy or not, I don't know that it's worth it to the authorities to pursue this guy because he's already wanted for other things, and they haven't caught him for those. So mine is kind of, like it's just a domain on the internet. It's not
Yes.
like anything. I mean, like let's just be honest here. Like, I'm just a website. Like it's just me and a couple people, and we write news. Like it's not like we're a big deal or anything. And so to the authorities, like to the people that are involved in that investigation, like this is probably the bottom of their list because this guy's wanted for other stuff that's much more serious than him basically getting in and taking our domain down and getting it re-registered. Um, but I'm not out to attack anybody. I don't have an agenda. I'm not trying to crash Gaul. I'm not trying to crash Paycoin. I'm not trying to make anybody lose their money. I'm literally just saying, here are the facts that we have. This stack of papers right here in my hand, like, these are the papers that we have with the information that we have, and we're not out to get anybody. We're just reporting what's in here. And I think that people think that I have like a personal vendetta or something along those lines, and I can understand. It seems like we do a lot of articles on Gaul, and
Well, I've
with,
talked quite a bit about GA myself because there seem to be a lot of
but
Dogecoin
there's
people
so
that
much
use
news
it.
to
Yeah,
talk about.
yeah.
It's basically every time I think, like, I'm like, all right, we have thousands of these pages at this point, just thousands upon thousands of pages. It's like, we've combed through these. I still have so many of these to read, and I find very revealing stuff in some of them, and it's like, well, we're not going to run it. But then, we come across another gem, and it's like, okay, we're news. And, this is huge piece of information. Like, this is a bombshell piece of information. Like, do we just not report it because it's hurting somebody's investment? Somebody recently by the name of Victor, who I think runs badbitcoin.org, tweeted at us. He said, you're hurting my investment. Stop. And it's like, do we stop reporting the news because it's harming somebody? Because it's not our intention to harm anyone. I don't have anything against any of these people. I don't even have anything against Josh as a person. Like, he can do what he wants. It's not my job to stop him. My goal here is not even like, let's just go for tons of page views. Like, I'm gonna write no matter what. I was writing back in June of last year when nobody was visiting the site. I didn't care. I still kept writing anyways. It's just what I'm passionate about. And it's one of those situations where do we sit on it? And it's hard because every time I think that this is the story that we're done with, we find out something new. And it's like I have friends who are hardcore, like, in the media, who are journalists, and they've been following along with some stories, and they're like, man, this is a story that just keeps on giving.
Yeah.
It's like, I know that we're going to be able to keep writing about it because there's always going to be something. And so that's kind of the situation here, where it's like every time I think that we've combed through, I think, about 7,000 pages so far, and there's more. Every time that it's like, all right, well, I think we've seen enough here. We find something new, or something new happens, and it's my job. The reason people come to the website is to read news, and it's still newsworthy. And every time that we think that the news has stopped or it's dried up, there's more news. And I will say this: the investigators look at it the same way. They look at the situation every time they think that they've got a pretty good amount of documentation on what's happening. Something new is coming along, like a new product is added, or the new promise of a new product is added, and it's like, well, shit, now we got to go add a bunch more pages.
That's the strangest thing is like there's like 6 companies that are attached to this whole deal. I mean,
So
there's
yeah, we've
the
got we've got Gall Miners, we've got ZenCloud,
yeah.
we have Paybase, we have the Paycoin Foundation, which I do sincerely believe, is not necessarily, like, Gall isn't controlling it, but I think that there's some influence there. I'm not going to speculate on it a whole lot because I haven't dug into everything yet. I know there's an investigation into some of the individuals there because of their association, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily doing, wrong or bad things. I don't know. I don't want to speculate. I do want to put that out there. We published a story about the Paycoin Foundation because that is factual. Like, there was a warrant, a search and seizure warrant obtained for Josh's email and for an individual who we're not going to name, and somebody involved with the Paycoin Foundation. Like, so there's an investigation there. I'll report that, but I'm not going to report that the Paycoin Foundation is a fraud because I don't know that. I don't have all the facts. Like, I'm just starting to get through some of these documents. So there's that, and now there's this new thing called CoinStand, which we're really investigating that one. There's some inconsistencies with the story, but I don't have, like, the piece of information that's like, this is the one that shows. Like, there's lots of information that could show that, but we don't have, like, something that's 100% like provable to everyone. so I'm not going to make an assumption that that is a golf company. But there's a lot of things, there's a lot of writing on the wall that it is associated with Josh,
Hmm.
and that's one of the situations where when we're done investigating it, like we're going to let the world know what we found, and it could go either way. I know that there is a lot of information though that is around that. So there's that. I mean, I've lost track at this point. Like I almost feel like A Beautiful Mind, like the movie where it's like
Yes.
you've got like pictures up on the wall and there's like string going from all the pictures, like just crazy. Like I probably look like I'm schizophrenic or something. Like there's just so much information that there's so many connections and there's so many people and there's so many players and it's just this giant web. It's really hard to keep track and keep straight everything. And so I think that plays against some of the investors to a degree, in that it's hard. Like one of the criticisms that I see from people on Bitcoin Talk about people on Hash Talk is it's like, oh man, those people are dumb. Like they forgot about Josh making this promise. It's like, well, Josh has made so many promises. Yeah, they might have forgotten at this point. It's hard to keep it all straight. It's hard to keep all that information uh, straight, and so not everyone is a spatial person, so not everyone can visualize and make those connections. And even we literally have had to draw out like these big spider maps and things like that to keep track of who are the players, who has said what, who is talking to what federal agencies, who is controlling what accounts and what names, and what subpoenas have turned up that these people are actually shills, like actual shills that are operated by somebody.
Well,
There's a
did you
lot.
see that article, the news article, where there was a reporter that admitted that they were paid to talk in a positive light about God Miner?
I haven't, but I send it over. I mean, I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised because one of the pieces of information that we found was that, and this was super clever. I have to hand it to Gall Miners on this one. To basically they were buying the news for a while. Lots of sites, and a lot of finger pointing has gone towards a couple other sites in particular, and a lot of people are like, oh, they were clearly shills for Gall Miners. I'm going to tell you that runs a lot deeper than people know.
Hmm.
We've just started scratching the surface on that kind of stuff. They did a lot of the right things when it comes to spreading the word about their product. They paid a lot of websites for ads. They paid a lot of websites for positive coverage. They astroturfed a lot of places, a lot of forums with a lot of stuff. They did the things that other large companies will do as well, and they did do those things. And it's hard. It's really hard to keep it all straight. It's really hard to know what's real and what isn't, and that's one of the reasons that it takes so long for us to report news sometimes. Is sometimes the news is just so convoluted that it's really hard to find the truth. And we do put out. I know a lot of people say you put out a lot of stories about Gall Miners, and it's like we put out a lot of news. Let's just be honest here. We put out a lot of news. We're not trying to ride their coattails. We're not trying to attack them or always write about them. We write about lots of things, and we have lots of investigations into lots of companies going, and those take time. Like, for example, a lot of people have said, well, why aren't you looking into LTC gear? Well, we're looking into it. We are. We just haven't found bombshell type information yet.
What is
We don't.
LTC?
So LTC gear. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
this cloud mining company that a lot of people have said is ripping them off, and there's a lot of information about there on Reddit, on different forums about how they aren't receiving payouts and that there's always an excuse. And that's not news because people know that. The news is what are their connections? Who is the guy behind it? That kind of stuff. Those are the things that we're trying to answer. And investigations like that don't happen instantly. There are some exchanges that we're digging into, like the executives and maybe some activity that they're doing. Like we're really spending a lot of time. We don't just, oh, well, we suspect this. We're going to run an investigative report with quotation marks around it. Like we're not going to say something until we know it's true. And Sometimes that takes months, and we're getting really close on several other cloud mining type operations and those kind of things. And so people are going to see more of those reports, and people forget, we don't just report on gold miners. We reported on Butterfly Labs very extensively. We reported on the SEC situation very extensively. We've reported on other Ponzi scams that have been promoted by big people in the Bitcoin space. We've reported on all of those things, but people forget that. They say, you only do gold miners. And that's just not true. We do a lot of things, and we have a lot of things that are going. And so um, to to I hate to say soon. That's the thing that we always hear in cryptocurrency. It's like soon, trademark. But it's again one of those things where it does take time, it does take effort, and we spend a considerable level of resources and time. I don't have a job. This is my job, and um, it's at the point where I'm basically out of money at this point, and that's not that I'm trying to say like, whoa, people give me money. No, I mean like it's like I've spent a lot of resources to get here, and that's why we found a way to turn this into a business, and I think that it's going to be a successful business, and there is a lot of resources and a lot of time being spent to investigate a lot of things. And I think that people are going to be surprised at some of the stories that we're going to start putting out in the next month or two.
Now, will
And
this will be on the regular site, or will this be in the digest that you have?
so actually, we're for the most part anything that's like a major investigative report that reveals any kind of fraud, any kind of scam, anything that I think that the general public should know about is going to continue to be published for free. We're not going to investigate something that's really big, and we're not going to put that behind a paywall. That's just that's doing a disservice to our readership. The
Okay.
things that we're going to put behind the paywall essentially are like there was an individual a couple months ago who kind of made a ruckus in the space and then just sort of vanished. And we tracked him down. Like I tracked him down. I went and flew and like met with this guy and had an interview with him. It's going to be that kind of stuff that's going to be behind the paywall, like the really long, like 3,000, 5,000 type words kind of stuff that's going to be behind the paywall. It's going to be the not the stuff that everyone needs to know. It's going to be the stuff that you like the site and you want to read a really good interview or something that's super insightful that you may not have known. That's the kind of stuff we're going to put there. I don't want to do people a disservice and make the news be behind a paywall. This is just, the other stuff. I want the news to still be accessible to everyone. And, we'll use the revenues, and starting on April 1st, we're gonna make all of our finances public, 100% accountable and transparent. Everyone can go on our website and see every dollar that we make, every dollar that we lose, every bit of cryptocurrency that comes into our wallets in near real time. We're building an entire accounting system that allows people to see this information in real time from the blockchain. And like once a day from our QuickBooks, essentially, we'll just put that information in. We're building an entire API for this, so everyone can see exactly how much money we're spending, where it's all going, and they can see for themselves that every single penny we make, we're literally putting right back into making sure that our contributors' cell phones are still turned on, making sure that they can get on a flight or get a rental car or just get gas in their damn car to get to an interview. And we want to be super transparent about that. And we want to report the news and make it super accessible for everyone. And so nothing will go behind the paywall that is a super big piece of news like that.
Well, that's fascinating that you're creating your own API, and there's a number of different businesses that are seeking to do the same thing, to demonstrate to their investors and to the public with the blockchain that
Yes.
the transparency. But to have a news organization doing the same thing, I give you props for that, because
No, thank you.
I've been waiting to see that from somebody, because people have spoken about it for a while
Yeah,
now, and it
absolutely.
hasn't been quite implemented.
It's a hard thing to do, and
Yeah,
it's hard to open your books to everyone,
yeah.
because there's a good chance this could all fail. Like Coinfire could fail. It's a startup, and I treat it like that, and it could come to a complete halt, and it could be a total failure. But hopefully, because of the information we're putting out, if we do fail, other people can look at that and learn where we messed up and maybe do it better the next time around.
Hmm.
Or it could be a wild success, in which case, do the same thing we're doing. Like, there's plenty of space on the internet. Like, do the same thing we're doing. And, that's the other thing. We're going to open source everything. And, we're working. We're working with another news organization who is a little more mainstream than us, and we've been kind of like this earworm to them. We keep saying, we should do these like transparent things. And they're like, yeah, maybe we should. We just keep pushing them and pushing them. And we promised that we were going to put our editorial like Bible. We have a book that every month we update it, and we say these are like how you source a story. This is how you do these things. We're gonna put that out there. We're gonna make that open source. We're gonna do it on GitHub, and that's gonna be something that we're gonna put out, and hopefully some other websites, in other spaces, not just the cryptocurrency space. Hopefully in any space, will see this and do the same. I want this to just be something that's different. Because I think that people are going to respond well to that. If there are websites that are super transparent, I think that there are people out there who want to see that. And I want to be the
I think
guy
there's a
that's doing
need.
it.
I think there's a need for that because so much has been either put behind a wall or there's so much iffiness out there right now where there's either disinformation or not properly sourced information that people want to see something that's just, just the facts, really, just something that's true. They don't want
Yeah.
to see the opinion or the BS or the spin. They just want to see the true thing.
Yep.
They want to know if you're reporting that the sky is blue and they walk out the door and they look up, the sky is actually blue.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's something that we want to create a system where it's like, hey, you know what? Here's how you can verify yourself. You can see for yourself that this is how we came to this conclusion. This is how we knew to report the truth. This is how others can do that. So we're going to be publishing at github.com/journalist. That's the plural version. We've set up a GitHub repository, and on that repository we're going to throw up our editorial Bible. We're going to throw up the various tools we use to create the Plus experience. We're going to throw up the various tools that help us do public accounting. These are all things that we are just trying to make sure that they're ready for public consumption, and that I'm very committed to making this happen. And it's something that I want others to see. I want to be as transparent as possible. So when we say we have a document, it's like, well, you were honest about all these other documents. You're probably being honest about this one. It adds to our credibility. It improves the space for everyone else, and I think that there is a demand for it. And so that's something that we're doing. And I'm not saying that this is the right way to go for every business. I'm not saying this is the right way to go for every cryptocurrency business, but I think that the cryptocurrency industry has this need for more transparency. I think that people want that. I think that that's pretty obvious from what we see on Reddit. Companies that are more transparent about their operations or their technical side or their security, people applaud that, and they take their business, they use their feet and their money, and they go to those places. They will pick the place that's more honest with them or more transparent with them. People are even willing to pay a little more. Someone may give an exchange a little more of their fee because they know that that exchange is taking security very seriously because they published everything there is to know about their security. And it also, it improves the space because, maybe there's something that somebody forgot. There are other people out there who will point out those problems or those holes, and it's like the open source movement. I sound like a huge hippie right now. I'm not. I'm actually like I'm a business person. Like, this is I don't know what's happened to me in the last year. I've gone from hardcore like business to like I'm a hippie now who thinks that things should be transparent. But I think that people will reward their business to the people who are doing that, and so if what I'm saying sounds very altruistic, and it's like, oh, this guy is like, he's just gonna give all this shit away for free, and it's like, yes, I am, and I do have altruistic purposes for that. I do want to see the space improve, but I also know that there's a demand for that, and I think that people will reward that. And so I think that it works from a business standpoint and from just I'm a hippie who, and I literally am starting to grow my hair out, trying to do good things. And so news, important, big, like we have a report we've been working on about Mt. Gox for months now. And someday, hopefully, we'll have enough information and it'll be good enough that we can put that out. And, I'm not making any promises. We may kill it because we may not find the truth ever. But, that's the piece of news I'm not going to put behind a paywall. I want that to be accessible to everyone because it has an impact on everyone.
Okay. Well, what about you also have the digest that you're trying to do,
Yeah.
and then the Chain Radio, which was a company that you acquired.
Yes.
How did that go about?
So, Chain Radio was actually started by a very close personal friend of mine in real life, and he had been in internet radio in the past, and he was kind of interested in cryptocurrency, and he said this could be a really cool thing. And so, this wasn't just a hey, I blindly emailed him. I know the guy in real life, and so he had a lot of trouble. It kept getting attacked. There was a lot of server issues. He had done internet radio, but he had never done it it had been years since he had done it, and so he didn't know all the security stuff, and he got very frustrated and just got sick of fighting all the problems that he had, and so one day we were out having we were doing what I guess you could call the burger challenge. We decided to see who could eat more hamburgers. Halfway through it, I'm like, hey, what's going on with Chain Radio? And he's like, well, I don't want to do it anymore. I'm having a lot of problems. I'm really excited about the space and I think it's cool, but I don't know exactly what I'm doing. Things have changed in the last couple of years, and so I basically gave him some cash for it, and he turned it over, and so right now we're working on trying to get those licenses transferred over, because it was a fully licensed station. They did have all the licenses for all the music and everything to make sure that we're paying royalties, that kind of stuff. And so we're working on getting all that stuff switched over, and hopefully we're going to have it relaunched here soon with more of a focus on providing real-time information. That was one of the complaints that I had and some other people had about Chain Radio previously, was that lots of shows and lots of entertainment, but not a whole lot in the way of what's happening right now at this very minute. And so that's something that I think that we're doing decently at, I guess.
Will it be like a headline news like you would hear on the radio, where it'd be like a
absolutely.
blip? Okay.
Yeah, so we're going to continue to play the music, because who doesn't love music? And we're still going to continue to play a ton of variety of music. We're going to continue to do different podcasts and shows. But let's say there's a giant piece of breaking news, some company decides to take Bitcoin. Instead of you having to wait until the next top of the hour for the news alert, you should know that instantly. Especially if you're day trading, you need to know that information in real time. And so we're gonna do what we can to bring our news gathering, especially with something like Digest, which is where we're curating lots of cryptocurrency news and narrowing it down to these are the pieces that are having an impact or that are really interesting. We're gonna try to do that and put out the news on Chain Radio almost in real time. So if something big really happens, myself or Brendan or Christina or somebody from Chain Radio or somebody from Coinfire will be on Chain Radio to talk about that, as it's happening, because I think that there is, again, it comes back to this: we need information quickly, we need information fast, and we need to know what's relevant. And we all have a need for that. I haven't met anybody who's yeah, I just don't care, I don't want to know anything. Even there are people out there who don't want to know anything. But for the most part, most people want to be better informed. They want to make better decisions. And to make better decisions faster, you need to have the information. And so we're hoping that we can help be that information. It's not just going to be news from Coinfire. Anybody that thinks that because we own Chain Radio that we're suddenly not going to read the news from other sites, that's just not true. There are lots of great news sites out there, like the Coinfront. Those guys, Brad is doing a great job over at the Coinfront. He reports on stories that we don't report on, and vice versa. And so, and sometimes we do report on the same things. We're still going to read news from other sources because we don't know everything. And so it's important to us that just because Coinfire owns Chain Radio, that Coinfire isn't the only source for Chain Radio. So we're going to try and keep the things that we're working, like having the news from lots of sources and playing music. We're going to try and keep those things, and we're just going to try to make it a little better. And it could fail. Like we could go in there and screw it up completely, and people hate it. In which case, we just go back to the way it was. But we won't know that until we try it. And so that's something that we're working on right now. And we're preparing to launch some new stuff, not just for our Coinfire Plus members, not just for those guys. We're working on a lot of the transparency stuff, and we're working on open sourcing a lot of things that we're using internally, and we're working on some new stuff that we hope will help the whole cryptocurrency community when it comes to news and facts and information. So we've got a lot going on. We're a small team, and we don't have a lot of money, but we know that by building this stuff that we're kind of taking that approach where it's like, well, we're going to build it and we're going to see what people do with it, and then we'll see how to monetize it as we're going. And I know that there are a lot of like hardcore startup people who are like, that is a terrible idea. Like, you need to figure out how you're going to monetize it from the beginning. And it's like, we don't know how people are going to use these tools, so it's really difficult to know how. Like, we know how we use them, but the way we use them might be different from the way somebody else uses it. And so, we need to figure out how to monetize it based on that. And so we're just trying stuff. Like I said, I'm a young guy, and I'm just trying some stuff. And so we're just going to see what works and what doesn't. And we've got a lot of really cool stuff coming.
Would you eventually take on like investors like a typical startup does, like an IPO round or anything like
So
that nature?
we've discussed that, and there have been some people who have basically said, if you were to sell a token, there are a lot of people who would buy it. It's really hard because we go down this slippery slope again of if another company makes an investment into us. So we've seen this in the venture capital space in the past, where some VC firms will invest in like a site like Pando Daily. Pando Daily is a great example.
Mm-hmm.
It's this competitor to TechCrunch, for those who don't know, and it has a lot of venture capital investment, but that makes them they're not beholden to it, and they're not required to do it, but they report a lot on their venture capital, like the guys who invest in, they report on a lot of their other portfolio companies. And they're not required to do that, I'm sure, but they feel like they need to. So we don't want to have that same kind of like, well, you need to report on this other company in our portfolio type thing. We don't want to go down that road, so we're trying to make this work as best we can without going down the venture route. That I can't promise you or anyone else that we won't do that. There could be a day where it's like we have no choice but to do that. But we're going to try everything we can to make sure that we don't have to go that route. And I'm not saying that that's a bad route to go. Like, I've been involved in venture backed companies. I've been on both sides of the table, like, as far as negotiating goes, and it's very much one of those situations where I have no problem with that style of business. I'm just trying to do it a little differently.
So you would think like the end goal is you believe that you will have enough of a customer base that's going to support the site. That's what you're trying to achieve, really.
Yeah, that is what we're trying to achieve, and it is a niche space, and the cost of how we're doing things is going down. It's the obviously the server cost goes up, but we've even we found people who can host us, and we've negotiated cheaper deals, and our cost of business is going down as we're getting better at it. So we're creating more internal tools to help us vet sources and get the right information, and meet with people in ways that aren't as costly to us. So as we do it, we get better at it, and our cost is actually going down. So which is interesting because our site is getting more and more popular, and there's been a lot more traffic to it, but we've managed to keep our costs they were really high. Like, I will be completely honest, and we've had this discussion with several people on Reddit. Our costs were really high when we started. I was going through thousands of dollars a month, traveling, trying to keep the site online, and all these other things because there were a lot of like really awesome tools. Like there were, but I didn't know about them all, and there wasn't a good way to like manage all of them in one place. And so, as this product, because it is a product, as it's evolved, we have learned how to do things better. We've come up with more efficient things, and so the price is going down. So I'm hoping that yes, we can sustain this based on memberships and minimal advertising. We try not to run a ton of ads, and I would like to keep it that way. And eventually, who knows? Maybe we won't have advertisements at all. Who knows? It's just a matter of it is a super niche space, so we know we're not going to make tons of money, but that's not the goal. We're not here to make tons of money. I would be lying to you if I didn't say yes, we'd like to make money. Who doesn't want to make money? Anybody that's
Yeah.
like, I don't want to make money, like they're a damn dirty liar. Like
Yeah.
everybody wants to make money. You have to make money because we live in a system where if you don't make money, like you don't live.
No.
So we do want to make money, but we think that we can make it a little bit differently, and we think that people will respond to that. And to be honest with you, people have been. We've sold enough Coinfire Plus memberships that we were able to cover all of our costs for the first time since we started without having to do any major advertising or anything like that. We do sell ads, and we're very competitive and on advertising. And for the first time ever, we could have sold no ads and we still would have broken even. And it might not always be that way, and I understand that, but it's an experiment,
That
and
must be like a great relief to know that you've broken even in a startup
yeah,
place, to be like your balance is zero.
yeah, no, it absolutely is. And we didn't make a ton of money. I mean, I think,
Yeah.
to be honest with you, we made virtually nothing, but we didn't lose money. And it's taken several months to get there, and we are experimenting with a lot of ideas, and we'll see what works and what doesn't, and that's just how it's going to be, and that's what we're going to keep doing. And I know there have been people who are like, I'm really concerned that Coinfire won't make it because it's not making any money, it's losing money. To be honest with you, like, I love doing this. Like, if I have to go take another traditional job like I was before to support the site, because if I go work a regular job and I just set aside a little bit of money every week to keep it going, like I'll do that. Because this is my passion. Some people their hobby is playing video games. That used to be one of mine. I don't have time for it anymore. Thanks to cryptocurrency is never stopping. So it's like if I go play a game for like 20 minutes, like who knows what happens?
The price could go plummet $100.
Right, well, and that's the thing. The other day I went and I played a very old game, Total Annihilation. Hadn't played it in a really long time, an old
Okay.
real-time strategy game. And I played it for about 25 minutes, and in that 25 minutes I came back and I had like 100 messages. And I'm like, what did I miss? Like I can't. So, but this is my hobby, like this is my passion. Like my passion is to write and try and experiment around and try these different things. And so I'll keep doing it because that's fun to me. It's fun to experiment and try to do things differently and try and push
Well,
the boundaries.
what I've learned from this discussion, Mike, is that not only are you're doing a hobby you're passionate about, but you're bringing something new to the space. Like when you're talking about the API and being open transparencies and having your editorial, book up there for everyone to
Yeah,
see, you don't really hear or see that from mainstream media. I mean,
right,
I'm sure there is an editorial policy from the Times, and maybe occasionally they'll publish something because something happens. But
right,
you're not gonna go on the Times and see like a big old book about how they do sources or how they do the editorial
right,
policies for any of these places, or even like the television and industry part, MSNBC, CNN, all those places, Fox. You're not going to see that. You're not going to see, the what they're paying for, like traveling, or if they pay
right.
for a person to come on to the show, like sometimes they do. Those type of deals. But for it to be open in such a niche space, you're gonna just the way technology evolves and being on GitHub, where people can pull that information and apply it to their own thing. I think that's gonna change things because it's something that right now we're coming to, like, I want to say a crest, or I don't know what the appropriate word is, where people want to see transparency in their journalism and the news, but they also want to see, how things are done. They want to see
Yeah,
the nitty gritty because they want to be able to trust their sources.
yeah.
Because right now there's not a lot of trust going on right there.
Well,
It
and,
is
and
not.
that's and that's 100% true. I read a report this week that something like 70% of the American population basically doesn't trust the news at this point.
No.
Or they rate it very poorly according to a Pew report. And it's like, we need to change that. And I think that the people who are doing it differently are going to make money. And I think that the people who are doing it differently, I'll tell you what, who's doing a really good job is Adam Levine and like the guys at Let's Talk Bitcoin. They're doing a great job of doing things differently and trying to build like this distributed organization. They're doing just a really cool thing there. And like I look at what they're doing and I think it's just like the coolest thing, and I think we need to be doing that as well, and we need to be working with them and doing all the things we can do with them together and everyone else in the space that's trying to do things differently. Like we all need each other. And so, I think they're doing a really good job. I think they're doing a really great job, honestly, on trying to do things a little differently. We're taking some of the things that they're doing and trying to work together with them on these things. And that's and you're right. I'm hoping that we can change the way people receive the news, and I'm also hoping that we can change the way people disseminate and distribute the news. Because there are people out there who are like, I would like to start a blog, and maybe it's for a really niche topic that I'm not interested in. Maybe they're really interested in it. Maybe there's somebody who really loves all the news about knitting. Like, I don't knit,
Yes.
but, there are people who do, and I'm sure that they're like, you would think there's probably not news in the knitting world, but I'm sure that there are. Like, I'm sure there are, like, little, like, celebrities in the knitting world who are doing things and are making news. Maybe somebody else wants to go start a news site about knitting. I want them to instead of struggling and going through all this stuff trying to figure out how to do it, like I want them to be able to just go to GitHub and be like, you know what, here is all this information that's available to me on how to start a news site, and I want them to go start the best damn news site about knitting they can start, because like that's awesome. Like that's just so cool. and
So
and
do you
so
perceive it to be like almost a plug and play eventually would happen where someone would be able to, like they do with WordPress, they're able to plug it in and they can have a new site up
I'm
and
I'm
running?
hoping that we can. I'm hoping that with some of the tools that we're putting out that it will help people. I know that Let's Talk Bitcoin has put out a really cool content management platform called Tokenly, and they're
Yes.
doing some really cool stuff there. And I am hoping that people can use that. They can use WordPress, whatever their choice is, and that we have like just a variety of like information and tools that will help them. So, like our editorial system is built with WordPress,
Mm-hmm.
and I want other people to be able to use that system. um, there is like our book is just a PDF basically. I want other people to be able to download that and use it. So yeah, I'm hoping that we can build the tools and a platform. I'm hoping that we can build things that are working with WordPress. I hope there are things that we build that work with Tokenly. Like I want to at least plant a seed for other people to do the same thing. And if they do it, like that's just awesome. I think that that's so cool, and I think that that's gonna change news, because right now, like we had talked earlier about, there's a lot of people who just get news from Reddit or Twitter, and it's not always accurate. But what if there are those people out there who are dedicated to curating that news and verifying it? And I'm hoping that we can give them the tools to help do that.
Well, did you see the news about, I think Twitter is going to explode in the news thing. They have a video integration now, plus
Yeah,
Meerkat. So I
yeah.
can see like real time a lot of stuff happening.
Oh yeah, and that's the world we live in. News is
Yes.
being democratized because people don't necessarily trust the news that they're getting, so they're
No.
going to get news from other people. I want there to be an environment where we have both, where there are those people who are trusted to curate and fact check and do these things, because we still need those people. There was this big thing where like newspapers are going to die, like nobody's going to read a newspaper, and it's like, yeah, print media is probably gonna struggle. Like that's a fact. But some of those principles from print media can't die. Like we still need an editor who can fact check things. We still need, you know, people that can do those things, because if we just lived in a world where all of the information is out there and we don't know what's true and what's not, like it's hard to make an informed decision. But you want to have those people who are doing that be trustworthy people, and hopefully people can use the tools and the books and the things that we're putting out, and we're just giving this away, and hopefully they can use this stuff to approach their news organizations and say, hey, are you doing this or something like it? And maybe those other organizations will see a hole or flaw in our plan, and they'll say, well, no, but we're going to do it this way. And everyone learns and everyone improves, and I think that that's important to society, and that's kind of what we're trying to do. And obviously we can make money from it because I have to be honest. We do want to make something from it, and if people know that these are the steps we went to vet these thousands of pages sitting on this desk, like they're more inclined to trust it.
Well, my other question for you is, have you placed or considered placing any like particular news article within the blockchain, as some people have done with like pictures or messages, or
Yes.
would you attach anything to any of the cryptocurrency blockchains that are out there?
We actually have we've been discussing that a lot recently,
Uh-huh.
and there is a chance that yes, we will do that. And so something that we've played around with, and this isn't something that we've said publicly yet, but it's something that there's been a lot of internal discussions about, is
Mhm.
creating a decentralized news sort like service based on the blockchain. So there are a lot of really hard technical questions that need answered to do this in a really good way. Like
Mhm.
Reddit's awesome, but you don't know what may or may not be censored. And the situation with Ellen Pao, who is this venture capitalist who just lost a trial,
Yes, I
a
haven't read
sexual
the story,
harassment
but I
trial.
saw the headline. Yeah.
Yeah, and so one of the things that had come out in that trial was that her husband is one of the key guys at Reddit, and he has been investigated in the past for running a Ponzi scheme. And somebody posted that on Reddit, and he had it deleted.
Mhm.
And so, sometimes there's censorship because,
Yes.
obviously they didn't want that getting out, especially during this trial. And so, what if there was a news service though? Like you download an app on your phone or on your computer, or you even visit a website that's just a gateway to a decentralized system of news where you can upvote, downvote, all these things in a decentralized manner. We've already got services that do these things, but nobody's really decentralized that system. And so that's something we've been talking about, and that could be the next thing that we do. We're gonna keep doing Coinfire because like I love it, like I enjoy it. But what if we can build a decentralized system, like really actually decentralized? Like there's no way that I can exert any control on that system because there's no centralized server. It's completely on the blockchain. All the news is on the blockchain. All the votes are on the blockchain. Your identity is tied to a public and private key that's literally a Bitcoin address, or another cryptocurrency. These are the things that we're talking about. These are the things that excite me. I know that these are the things that excite people like Adam over at Let's Talk Bitcoin, and I think that we're going to start seeing in the near future people who are really trying to figure out these really hard technical aspects of it, because that's not an easy thing to take on. Not to mention that it's not a profitable thing, because if you want it to be truly decentralized, like it's difficult to exert control on to make money from. So it's going to take like a group of people who want to solve those problems, and we've been discussing that. And um, I'll just go ahead and say I will make this announcement here that that is something that we are looking into, and not just for the cryptocurrency space, but for the entire news space in general. And I'm hoping in the near future that we can discuss. We've kind of got a name for this product. We are hoping to discuss it with some other people in the cryptocurrency space in the near future.
Mhm.
And I think that a decentralized news service, and there are lots of things that need to be addressed. Like how do we stop spam? How do we prevent all these different things? I'm hoping that between, like, if we can just sit like the brightest minds in cryptocurrency down in a room, that maybe we can figure out how to do this.
Well, you also have to think about transmitting the information, because
Yeah.
currently, right now, the blockchain in itself is very small. But there's
Yes.
also things like storage, which is trying to do the cloud
Right.
storage thing. There's Open Bazaar, which is attempting to decentralize. And there's a few others like marketplace things that are attempting to decentralize and distribute information as far
Yeah.
as the decentralized aspect of how you can set it up. But that, I guess the big hurdle would be the transmitting of information, not
Yeah.
necessarily the decentralized aspect, because there's different things out there that have already attempting or doing that right now.
Right.
So
And that's the other thing that we are
yeah.
looking at, we're looking at like what is MadeSafe doing or any of these other projects. It's like how can we take that technology
Hmm.
and basically build like distributed Reddit, and how do we do it like in a really good way? Like it needs to be really, really good. It needs to really shine. It needs to work well. It needs to be completely accessible. It needs to be truly decentralized, and it needs to be accessible to people who don't know jack shit about cryptocurrencies. Like we need a way for them to go to a website that's like literally just a gateway, and it needs to be like different people are operating those different gateways, and maybe they're putting ads on that or whatever to make money, but there's no way for them to tamper with that information. There's so many questions, and even things like how do you store an image, and does everyone store the image, or do just some people store images, and how do you convince people to you have to build in some kind of incentive for me to give up some of the hard drive space on my computer. So we're looking at
Hmm.
things like MadeSafe and all these other projects that are doing those things, and we're trying to say how are they doing these things, can we build on those platforms, and what are ways to decentralize the news, because in an ideal world, you don't just have to trust Mike at Coinfire. You can trust a giant group of people who are doing the news, and you don't have to worry about censorship, like they deleted this post and that kind of stuff. Like it needs to be
Or not
something
report
that
on
keep
a
right,
subject or story at all. They just kind
right.
of ignore it.
And so it needs to not be mutable. And
Yeah.
so the internet already does a great job. Like let's be honest, the internet does a great job at this. It's very easy for somebody to go set up a website and say just about anything they want. However, there is always that risk that that site can be shut down because it's on it's on a centralized machine. That's what's exciting about like MadeSafe or these other projects. They're trying to decentralize that stuff, but we need to make it super accessible, and we need to make sure that anybody can get on there and submit news. Anybody can vote up the news. Anybody can comment on it, and so that's something we're really, really looking into, not just for the cryptocurrency space, but lots of other spaces. And so we may have something to say regarding all that in the future. We may not. We may sit down in a room and decide that this is not the project for us, but hopefully somebody will figure it out and will work on it, and I'm sure that there are people who are. And so I'm excited about stuff like that.
That's fascinating to me because I when I was thinking about all the things that decentralize, news wasn't one of them that came up in mind. It was like a lot of it was entertainment for me personally because that's something I'm interested in. But to
Yeah,
see, but to see, I can see how a decentralized news service would greatly benefit on a global aspect because you have to think of all the people that when they put information up, whether it be through Twitter or Facebook or whatever, and they can, go to prison or disappear
yeah,
one day. And to
yep,
have the ability of that information still be out there, even if that person who put it up there might not longer exist, that information is
yeah,
not going to get removed. It's not going to get stolen or not stolen, but, deleted
right.
or,
And that's something that the blockchain has done a really cool job of. Like the information's there, like it's there, it's always there. So it's like, well, how do we disseminate news, and so that's the other thing. We have discussed putting our articles out on the blockchain. We've discussed setting up a Tor service. We've discussed lots of things and lots of new distribution methods, and we are working on all of them as hard as we can while still reporting the news. And that's why it's like, well, Coinfire may only put out a new story, 2 or 3 times a week versus like 3 times a day. But we're doing a lot of stuff. We're doing a lot of fact checking, and we're building a lot of product that we hope will make this all a better experience. And we could succeed and we could fail. But no matter what, we're giving it a try.
well, let's cover what you have. You have Coinfire Blog, you have Coinfire Digest, you have Chain Radio, you have the potential of developing a decentralized news service. I mean, that's a lot you got going on there for yourself
It's
there, Mike.
yeah, and we and I basically spend every night reading through thousands of pages of documents on various companies, various investigations, and you know uh, hundreds of emails. I get so many emails all the time from people who are like, please look into this, and can you tell us how to get a hold of these people? We're doing everything we can do. This is my life. My life is literally, sitting at a computer, sitting at my MacBook and or my iPad or whatever it is, and cranking this kind of stuff out, and um, I just this is my passion, and uh, I'm gonna do everything I can to just keep doing this.
All right. Well, is there anything else you'd like to mention to our listeners, or anything else you want to convey or say to them?
Absolutely. So I should note that um, these are my opinions. They're not necessarily the opinion of all of Coinfire. Even though
Hmm.
I'm the executive editor, there are other people who are involved with the project. We do have an editorial board essentially of myself and a couple other people who um, are always trying to make sure that personal. It's hard. I am a human being and I have a personal opinion. Like even on the Gall Miner stuff, I do have an opinion. But I try to make sure that that opinion is never in the news, and that is not always an easy thing to do. And I will fully admit that, and I want even the haters who are probably going to listen when they see that this is out there and I'm on there, I want them to know that I do have an opinion, but I do my best to keep it out. And we have an editorial board, and that editorial board contains other people who don't agree with me, and so we do everything that we can to make sure that a personal opinion does not come through in the news. And so, everything gets edited multiple times with people who have dissenting opinions other than my own. Even though technically, I mean, it's my site. Let's be honest. Like if I really wanted to, I could be like, "You're all fired." I don't want an editorial board anymore. But
Well,
I
we already
do.
we already have that, Mike. It's called the Drudge Report. We don't need that single opinion or out there, or the Huffington Post, I guess is the other one.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah.
I don't want to be an opinion one way or the other. I just want to be the facts in the middle. And so we're doing everything that we can do. And there are people who are no matter what are gonna say, you guys definitely have an agenda and you definitely have an opinion. And I understand that. And you can I just know what is in my heart, and that's all I know. And I know what I think, and I do have an opinion, and but I don't want that to come across in the news. And so there are people who are constantly fact checking everything. Even though I own the site, like there are other people who are fact checked, and sometimes they come back and they're like, I read the same document you did and I didn't get the same information, so you're going to need to take it out. And it's like, well, because I want people to trust what we're saying, and I want people to trust what we're doing. The information comes out, and so we just delete it out. And that's how this has to be. If I want to sell this to people as, you're coming here and you're getting like just the facts, sometimes opinions have to be cut out, and sometimes facts that could be misinterpreted also have to be cut out, even if they're facts. Like, if there's a chance that, they're gray, like they have to they don't get out there. And so I want everyone to know that yes, I am a human being, and yes, I do have an opinion, but we are doing everything that we can to make sure that none of our contributors, regardless of their opinions on anything, are appearing. We want to do just the news, and we've talked about doing reviews and things like that, and we may. And those are obviously opinion, but that will be in a much different way than we present the news, and we will make sure that that distinction is definitely made.
Well, I would think, there are a few sites that do this, but I would think there is a kind of a need for a fact-only reviews where,
Yeah.
something talks about, does the hardware work?
Yep.
How does it work? What kind of computer chips? Like just the basic, I guess you
Absolutely.
could say the cosmetics of it. And then you could talk about the opinion of whether or not it's actually just something worth buying for, or if it's
Right.
good quality, which that kind of has an opinion of it itself, depending on a person's needs or viewpoints.
And that's something um, we are hoping that we can kind of address that. And it's another one of those things where we are going to try and do reviews a little differently than they've been done too, if we do go into that space. And that's still very much up for discussion. And so I won't say that, we're going to do them, but it's something that we're looking at. And, if we're going to do them, we're going to try and do them differently than they're being done currently. So,
Well, can I
uh, you
make
know,
one suggestion if you do
absolutely.
that? Could you do like a grandma section? Can your grandma actually use it? Because there's some
Yes.
people that they do it and they walk it through and they say, anyone can do this, and I'm like looking at it and it's like, I might be able to do this, but I know if I were to show this to my sister, who's not that tech savvy, but still a pretty smart person, I don't even think she could set this up or she could use this. And I think sometimes, I guess the reviewers are not aware that their knowledge base is so great, and even though they think they're simplifying it, there's still people that are lower down on the knowledge pool.
Yeah.
you know?
No, absolutely, and that's that's something that I think that really does need to be addressed. Is like, for example, there's a service out there that is allowing you to do like peer-to-peer trading of bitcoins for like products, and
Yes.
everyone's like, this service is so awesome and it's so cool and it works really well, and it's like, well, is that accessible to like regular people? Like, is it easy for them? And that's something that
hmm
sometimes I think has been forgotten. Like, this eh,
Not everyone
how
has a
easy.
credit card.
Right,
You know.
and not everyone knows, everything there is to know, and
hmm
they don't know what multi-sig is. They don't know these
Yeah.
things. They just we need to make it really dead simple, and that's something we're discussing. Like, if we are going to do reviews, like one of the things that we've discussed is like, let's go find some people who know nothing about cryptocurrency, who don't really know a whole lot about computers, and let's sit them down and be like, all right, like, use this product. Um, so that's something that I think we definitely need to find a way to do, and I like this idea of like, can my grandma do it? I think that's great.
yeah.
So I have to tell you, that's awesome. And if we do decide to do something like that, hat tip to you on that, because that's a valid question. Like, I had a friend who bought his grandma an Android phone and she couldn't figure it out, and it's like, like, why did you waste your money buying your grandma like this like smartphone? Like, she
Yeah.
doesn't know.
She doesn't
Um,
understand.
no, yeah, and so it's like, I'm not saying that iPhone's better or anything like that. It's like, well, there are other products out there that might have been easier for her. Maybe she just needed one of those like phones that, like the Jitterbug or whatever. That it's a phone that's marketed towards the elderly. It
Yes.
doesn't need all the bells and whistles. Like, can your grandma use it? Like, if you're gonna buy your grandma something, like, you should probably make sure she knows how to do it. And so that is a question that needs to be addressed. And also, if we're going to review products or services, we need to, these are the things we're trying to figure out. Like, obviously we don't want people to give us a product or service. Like, we still want to pay for them. Just so there's not that chance of, well, it's hard for me to disparage this product because, well, they gave it to me for free. So, trying to come up with ways to to address that and make sure, we can afford those things and all that stuff. So those are all things that, lots of unanswered questions, but we're trying. We're trying to figure them out. So,
Oh, I just thought about
um,
another thing. This is something I experienced with the wallets. Some wallets are like only iOS 8, and I'm
yes,
still on 7. So it would
yes,
be nice. Is it truly accessible for everyone? Like,
everyone. And I
can
agree.
yeah, can
And
or
that's
do I have to buy? I can't pony up, six
right.
hundred dollars or go
No,
for the upgrade right now. I just
right,
can't.
exactly.
So
No,
that's
and
the other
that
thing.
you're,
Yeah.
you're right, and that's something that I think that people forget, and that's something we see in like the piece, like the technology like magazine side of the world. Like, I
Yes.
remember like reading PC magazine, and this is nothing. This is not a slight against Ziff Davis or any of those guys. Like, I have friends who are involved in that industry. They forget, they're reviewing like, oh, this new 4K monitor is so fucking awesome, like, it's so sweet, everything's so great on it, it's so cool. And it's like, yeah, that's, you can only use that with like a top of the line new computer that's capable of that.
Yeah.
And so they forget, they're like, this is so cool, but they totally forget that a lot of, like, the majority of people aren't going to have like that technology. Not everyone's going to have the brand new iPhone. Not everyone's going to have the latest Android uh, phone. They're not going to have the latest tablets. So it does. That's something that needs to be accounted for. Is like, is this still accessible to people?
Especially if you have to think a global sense, not everyone's going to have the access to,
Right.
you know, the latest and greatest. They
It's
might,
kind of like whoever loses the Super Bowl, their shirts are sent to Africa, and
yes,
it's like technology is the same thing. It's like, a lot of the cell phones that don't sell here in America, like the Facebook phone, was a
yes,
giant flop in America. They didn't just like take all those phones. They didn't take all those and just go destroy them. I mean, they destroyed a lot of them, but a lot of them went to third world countries because it didn't sell here. But damn, those people would just love to have a phone. So,
yeah.
while
Windows is
people hated it
big.
here.
Yeah, Windows Phone is big in the third world.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's accessible, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's something that I think that a lot of people are forgetting as well, and I think that that's something that needs to be better addressed.
Well, Mike, I very much appreciate you coming onto the show and
Thank you
speaking
for
with
having
me.
me.
I have actually learned a lot. Like, there's things that you're talking about. Like, I seen like the digest thing and the radio thing, but the whole transparency thing, it made me really think. Yeah, we should decentralize the news. I mean, I didn't even think.
Yeah,
I think about
why would we not at least try? I
yes,
mean, it's worth a shot.
yes. That's just you just blew my mind today. It's like, well, yeah. Why aren't we? That's so obvious. Like one of those obvious things. Like you see the picture and you try to find the gorilla or something. It's like right there, and it's like, oh, yeah, it's right
No,
there.
if nothing else, we collectively should all at least try. Why
Yeah.
not? I mean, what's it going to hurt to at least try?
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. We should be trying these things. We should be trying them and letting them collapse and fail, and
And
then
then learn from
okay,
them.
learn from it, and then either try again, try a different way, or figure out something else, or like, okay, well, we're not there yet, so let's do something else until we get there.
Absolutely. And I think that I'm happy that I got you thinking on it, because I mean, who knows, to do this and to do this well, it's going to take like a big effort from a lot of people, and so
Yes.
I will, as we're continuing these discussions, I'll send you some emails, and hopefully we can just get like a group of people like looking at this from different angles, because this is something that's just we should at least try, and why not try? um, so why not? I mean, it's just, it could be so cool if it even
Well,
even if we do it and it fails,
well,
you
you could
know,
fail, but you could be like the Napster fail, where it failed, but look
but
what
it
happened
spawns
after.
something totally new.
Yes. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
That's what that was one cool thing about Napster and all that P2P stuff with the centralized system. Like, we
Mhm.
learned that we needed a decentralized system.
Mhm.
Well, that would have never happened if it hadn't been for that failure.
Yes. Because what if they succeeded?
We
And
would
then
have a system where eventually they would have litigated and shut it down.
yes, yeah. So you can always, if you're gonna shoot for failure, that would be the best failure to have. Okay, well, I mean, if you're gonna fail like that. Fail
Absolutely.
glorious.
Fail as hard and be as loud and as big as you can.
Yes.
Because you know what, and be noisy about it, because
Yeah.
too many people are, and this is a big thing that is in the startup world. Too many people want to hide their failures, and it's like, no, how else can you and others learn? If you fail, put out there why you failed. Maybe somebody else won't make the same mistakes. Maybe you won't make the same mistakes, and maybe people are willing to give you a second chance.
Or their failure could be like the thing where someone's like, wow, that person was so out of the box thinking there.
Yep,
That's such a great idea. It just, we see it all the time. Great ideas are not executed well. We see that all the
absolutely.
time. And it's like, well, look at all those great ideas this person had. They just need someone to be like, George Lucas them and like, no, George, you can't do that. That's why the first Star Wars 3s were so great, was someone was telling George no. And
Please do not remake the old movies, George. Please.
please don't
I
do
know
that,
that you have
George.
better technology now. They were fine.
They were
Don't do
fine.
this.
We
Stop
don't
it.
need we don't need that added stuff. We don't need that added scene. Han Solo
That thing that
shot
you're doing,
first. Yes.
that thing you're doing, stop it.
Stop
You are
it.
wrong,
You're
sir.
you're wrong. Exactly. That's everyone needed that, and when you don't have that, that's when you get, Phantom Menace to Revenge of the Sith.
That's when Jar Jar Binks happens.
Exactly. It's when Jar Jar Binks happens.
And I'm sure there'll be somebody pissed off about that. I'm sorry.
Well,
Well,
I
I'm
guess
not really sorry.
no, you can't.
I
George
own
should be
it.
the one. Yeah, George should apologize for that.
Maybe that's it. Maybe we should. That's how we sign this off. It's like, we publicly demand that George Lucas publicly apologize.
For Jar Jar Binks. All
Oh.
right. To the moon, everyone. All right. Hold on. There we go. No, you're not stopping. Why aren't you stopping?
Ah.